The story is about a girl named Juliet Elizabeth Holliday, born in a rural area of Kansas. And thanks to being called that, she was always tormented by someone shouting for Romeo. Some even went as far as quoting lines from Romeo and Juliet, even when she got annoyed and asked them to stop. Obviously, that never worked. And not even having red hair, which looks nothing like the characters, spared her from those jokes. Shakespeare's character is described as a beautiful girl like Olivia Hussey, but she and the protagonist are nothing alike. Back to her hair, it's described as a ginger red, and Juliet doesn't think the color is bad. However, she always wondered what color would appear when searching it on Google. Another thing she wants to understand is why everyone keeps asking about Romeo as if it were some kind of funny original joke. Once, someone asked, "If you're sitting alone like that, where's your Romeo?" And the girl replied that he had suddenly died after taking too much medicine. That annoyed the person, who called her cynical for ignoring the unfunny joke, and Juliet simply thanked them for it. Gray Holt, captain of the football team, says that's not a compliment, at least not for most people. Unlike when she was a child, now grown up, Juliet doesn't feel intimidated, and tells the boy that, just like Romeo, he'd be the one to take the wrong medicine and end up dead. That became a good comeback for everyone's annoying, stressful jokes. It worked well, until Romeo transferred to her school. A 17-year-old blonde boy from England is introduced, and his name is Romeo Buchanan. The teacher asks everyone to be kind to him and to help him out since it's his first time in Kansas. Romeo is very polite, introducing himself to his classmates and saying that even though some things are unfamiliar, he hopes to get along with everyone in the future. The girls were charmed by the new student. The boys, on the other hand, were fine with him. No teasing or annoying comments. The teacher asks if anyone has any questions about the new boy, and the class nerd wants to know which part of England he's from. Romeo replies that he's from London. Another question is whether he studied at Eton College, a prestigious private school for boys. Without waiting for an answer, the students argue that maybe he didn't study there just because he's from England, but the teacher ends the speculation by revealing that the boy actually transferred from Eton. Now they want to know the reason he moved to Kansas. The others whisper theories about it, thinking the story sounds strange, while Juliet is the only one not interested. Everything was fine until the first joke came. Did you name him Romeo? As always, Gray tries to be the class clown. It leaves the redhead irritated, wondering why he'd ask something like that. The player only stares at her with a teasing smile. Romeo says his name is a bit too classic for someone born in the 21st century, but it's a tribute to his grandfather. Then the other boy says the name isn't that original, pointing out that there's already a Juliet in the class. That leaves the new student surprised. They introduce her as Juliet Ginger of Ravenwood, which annoys her because they changed her middle name for the sake of a joke. Finally, Romeo and Juliet's eyes meet. The blonde boy has a gentle smile. The redhead looks surprised, until that gaze of his makes her quite embarrassed. The silence between them ends when the teacher says Juliet can show Romeo around the school. She quickly protests, asking why it has to be her and not Benjamin Weaver, the class president. After all, it's his responsibility to show new students around, and the boy already had about 20 pages of jokes prepared for these school tours. Finally, someone worth using them on. Mr. Harrison says Romeo came to Kansas to meet Juliet, and that it's destiny. After all, with such a coincidence, how could he trust that task to anyone else? The teacher adds that, besides that, he hasn't decided on the after-school schedule yet, but there are people who can guide him later. Juliet knows this is just Mr. Harrison's revenge for her not choosing English literature this semester. During the 6th-year class presentation, she was dragged onto the stage for the play Juliet of Kansas and forced to rehearse those lines 5 hours a day. In the hallways, the whispers are inevitable. It's break time. The girls gossip about the commotion since the new student's arrival, and Juliet already seems tired of the whole story. Classes are about to start. Hers is French and the redhead's is physics, so they have to split up. On her way to class, Juliet gets a big surprise when she finds Romeo there. Irritated, she slams her books loudly on the desk. Her classmate comments that the new guy is really quick. The blonde he's talking to is Veronica Adams, the Queen of Ravenwood and a celebrity with 30,000 followers on Instagram, and Juliet overhears the line, "No matter how many there are, you won't care about them." But the redhead's curiosity is focused on the reason Romeo transferred from Eton College. The girl beside her whispers her theory, that maybe he was expelled for selling illegal stuff. After all, if nothing had happened, what reason would there be to come study in Kansas? To them, it's very strange to leave such a prestigious school, so it might have been some fatal scandal he couldn't handle. That theory makes Juliet thoughtful, but soon she's surprised by Penny asking whether a boy that handsome, if he had used a little drugs and been expelled, should be forgiven. Of course, it's not like Juliet doesn't understand the girl. After all, Romeo has luminous blonde hair like melted gold, bright blue eyes, and a face that looks sculpted. Plus, he's tall and has the kind of looks that can easily become the hottest topic in a small rural school like this. As for the player Grey Holt, maybe he's in crisis, since he used to be Ravenwood's top guy. Juliet says he doesn't seem that bad, though she also jokes and teases all the time. Curious, Penny wants to know if Holt and Buchanan will get along, but the redhead says there's no one he couldn't get along with. And besides, the new guy doesn't seem like the type to play football. Penny would rather see him run for student council president. Thinking about it, Juliet realizes she doesn't know much about Eton College, only that it must be a very famous place. That makes her even more curious about the mystery behind Romeo's transfer to a regular public school like Ravenwood. Finally, classes end, and Juliet can be free from that place. She tells someone about the new student transferred from England, which catches the other person's attention, curious to know why he came from so far away. Then the girl explains that the new boy came from Eton College. It's not known if Romeo had ever been to the United States before, but it's his first time in Kansas. Juliet even mentions that in teen movies, it's common for girls to chase after handsome boys. Even though there's Grey Holt, he's not that much. Maybe the atmosphere got lighter with the arrival of the new heartthrob. For the redhead, it felt like magic for the girls in her class. Then comes the joke. Her friend asks if the transfer student is Harry Potter, but he got the character wrong since his name is Romeo. That leaves Luke Theobald, her neighbor and childhood friend, quite surprised. Juliet reminds the boy how much Mr. Harrison loves to tease her and says that if he had continued, the teacher would have gathered the three of them and pushed them into the Shakespeare play club. After all, Luke studied with her at Ravenswood up until elementary school and had to play the role of Tybalt because of his name, Theobald, who is the nemesis in the play. That happened 12 years ago when Luke was a very introverted boy. She wasn't interested in stepping on a theater stage, but even so, she went up. As a result, she asked to join him so he wouldn't be alone. After her friend went to attend high school at a private science school in West Milford, Mr. Harrison's focus turned back to Juliet again. Fed up with it, the girl says Luke should have been there when the teacher mentioned Shakespeare, but he denies it, which makes Juliet irritated and demand a bit more empathy for her case, especially since she had to flip through her English literature book from start to finish. Smiling, her friend guesses she must have found something by the author. But luckily, there wasn't even a single line. Luke laughs, thinking that's a good thing. Juliet's attention turns to the computer, asking if it's really that fast, and the boy confirms it, explaining that if it's running at that CPU speed, he can't use another. He's writing a program code for submission to a contest. Since life in the school dorm is uncomfortable, whenever classes end early, he comes back home and then goes to Juliet's place. Luke comments that he thought his code would take longer to finish. After all, he's doing it on a research computer, but in the end, it's running quite fast. This computer belongs to Juliet's father, who is a statistics professor. It has upgraded specs, runs faster with a better network, and was placed in her room because there wasn't space elsewhere. Luke is fascinated by it and managed to get permission to use it through some kind of deal with the man, and Juliet has already gotten used to her friend using this super machine. The girl mentions that she's thinking of taking app development as an elective subject and wants to know her friend's opinion about it. Luke asks if her grade in coding class last semester was good, which she confirms. Then he says it wouldn't be a bad idea. After all, it won't be hard at first since she'd develop a basic app. That's how Juliet's electives were decided, leaving only her after-school program to choose. Juliet looks for options on her phone. The first one is ice hockey, but Luke questions how she'd do that in Kansas. The dance department is a terrible choice since she dances like an octopus in water. The girl also doesn't want to study Spanish after school, even though she speaks it well. Another day comes and Juliet is back at school. One of her friends asks about her decision to join the Astronomy Observation Club. She says Juliet doesn't even know anything about astronomy, but for the redhead, it's never too late to learn something new. Her friend suggests that if she's only interested in fashion, they could take classes in the lab instead. The club's activities are held only on Mondays after school. However, all members must meet at school every Thursday from 8 to 11 p.m. It's only for students with a driver's license and requires parental authorization. Since everyone's busy partying on Thursdays, few people might sign up. In the end, it's just curious enough to spark Juliet's interest. And compared to other extracurricular activities, it seems easier. Changing the subject, the girl asks if she's ready to give a school tour with her supposed soulmate. She's annoyed that, because her name is Juliet, that's the main reason she was made responsible for showing Romeo around. The girl also points out that the redhead soulmate seems to be quite rich. She saw him wearing a Fjorden shirt, a limited edition that costs $2,200. This revelation leaves Juliet completely shocked. She asks if her friend is sure about that, which offends her. Since as a future student of Parsons, a private design university famous for its fashion program, there's no way she'd get it wrong. So she's absolutely certain of what she saw. To make sure, Juliet decides to look up the shirt and is completely shocked by the price. Soon, she finds Romeo in the hallway, flashing a smile and wearing his expensive shirt. Her friend was indeed telling the truth. The blonde boy is approached by other students, and although he's new, which explains their curiosity, Juliet is still surprised that he's surrounded by so many people. That's only going to make her job harder later when trying to talk to him. However, Juliet has to finish this tour today, so she can't keep putting it off. But it's not an easy mission. Not to mention she's worried about how long all this is taking, and she can't end the day like this. Finally, she manages to approach Romeo. Juliet explains that she's the one chosen to give him a tour around the school during class. Inside, the redhead is irritated with herself because she could have been a bit more straightforward and boring. Oh, and she also forgot to be more polite by saying her name. With a smile, she introduces herself to Romeo, but he already knew that. After all, they have the same English and physics classes, which surprises Juliet that he still remembers. Smiling, Romeo says he's sure she must remember his name too, and not because he's a transfer student, and that's something she can't deny. Before starting the tour, Juliet asks if he's already seen much of the school, but that's not something Romeo could know. After all, it's only his second day, and all he's seen are a few classrooms. With that information, the redhead decides to start with room 108. First, she explains that he shouldn't be seen carrying all his books around because the second-year students might mistake him for a freshman. The next place is the math lab, but the girl advises using the back doors. That's because the juniors use the lockers there, so it gets a bit crowded after science class. Juliet explains that students have lunch during the first period and can choose between regular cafeteria food or Mexican food, which surprises the new student. Since the principal is Mexican, he says that adding diversity to the lunch menu is, in a way, doing the same for the school. The girl tells him not to expect it to be boring. The regular food is like Mickey D's but with less salt, and the Mexican food is a lighter version of a taco shell. In her opinion, both options are good. Their conversation is interrupted. Nick has become a content creator and, with a big smile, asks them to say hi to his subscribers. With a big grin, Juliet greets them. Then she pulls the camera closer just to say there are better things to do than sit around watching Nick's videos, advising people not to waste time with the guy. That makes everyone around laugh. Nick immediately snatches his camera back from her. Then he makes his best move by saying the girl seems very happy now that she's found her Romeo. She really didn't expect him to hit back like that. And thinking about it, the teacher pairing the two of them gave plenty of material for jokes. Juliet apologizes to Romeo for all the confusion, but he's fine with it. Not to mention he's had the same experience, with people jokingly asking where his beloved is. In the end, they're both victims of Shakespeare. The blonde boy always answered those questions by saying he hadn't met his lover yet, unlike Juliet, who simply says her partner passed away, and Romeo thinks that's a good line to use next time. The two start walking through the hallways. Meanwhile, the redhead says she thinks his name is nice. It's unique and has a beautiful ring to it, but she'd like it a lot more if it weren't always associated with her own name. Romeo wasn't expecting that statement. Then he surprises her by asking, "What's in a name?" That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. What he just quoted is Act 2, Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet, lines 43 to 44. That makes the redhead laugh, since she thought the British were too sophisticated to joke like that. But they enjoy dark humor after all. It's the homeland of Shakespeare and Monty Python. Another revelation is that his name is actually a tribute to his great-grandfather, but people think it's because of the play. The boy even tells her about his experience in Italy, where he found out it's a common name for cats. However, what catches Juliet's attention is his trip. After all, she hasn't left Kansas since she was 7. The blonde boy says that Juliet is a beautiful name in Italy. That leaves the girl completely shocked. Her mind glitches, not knowing how to respond to such a compliment. Too nervous to think of anything, Juliet asks if he has a car. Since that sounds confusing, she tries to make it simpler by asking if he uses any kind of transportation other than the school bus. Still flustered, she tries to explain that she needs a way to get around if she stays late for extracurricular activities. Romeo explains that he's still not used to driving on the right side of the road, so for now he'll take the bus. Then it's his turn to ask. So the blonde boy wants to know if she's chosen something to do. Juliet tells him about the astronomy club, explaining that there's an observatory in Kansas and how the club's activities work. Their conversation flows well, and the redhead feels comfortable enough to ask what he used to do at his old school, discovering that he did rowing. Unfortunately, the town doesn't seem to have any lakes or rivers suitable for rowing. Juliet then suggests he try another activity, mentioning that the soccer team is really good, but she's not the only one, since Gray Holt was the first to suggest that idea. Finally, the tour ends, and Romeo thanks her for showing him everything, saying he's sure he won't get lost thanks to her. The girl doesn't have much to say besides being glad she helped. Juliet is also satisfied that, with the mission accomplished, she's finally free to go home. But she's interrupted halfway there by Mr. Harrison, who wants to know how the tour went. The girl makes it clear that she showed him everything, so there's no need to worry. After all, it's not like Ravenwood is a huge castle like Elsinore. This time, the joke is about Hamlet. Mr. Harrison says he's sure Romeo behaved much better than Hamlet. Everyone at school knows the man is obsessed with Shakespeare. Taking advantage of his rambling, Juliet seizes the chance to escape. Finally safe from all the madness, she gets into her car. Suddenly, someone knocks on the window. It's Jasmine Lee, which sparks the redhead's curiosity to know what she wants. After all, they've never been in the same class. The girl asks if she can give a bag to Luke, but Juliet assumes she means Lucas Herringer, who was in her class last semester, so she tells her she doesn't know him, but it's actually about Luke Theobald, her neighbor. That leaves Juliet curious about how the two know each other. Jasmine says they're both volunteers at the Kansas Cultural Center, and that she's just asking a favor since she won't be able to go that day. Juliet then agrees to do it without a problem, placing the bag beside her, completely curious to ask Luke about it later. Suddenly, message notifications pop up on her phone, catching her attention. It's from Izzy, asking if she's not coming to visit. The child is Luke's younger sister, who was born after Juliet's family moved to Kansas, so she's known her since birth. To the redhead, she's like a little sister, and the girl asks her to come see her since the last visit was last week. Answering Isabella's dramatic request, she goes to their house. As soon as Juliet steps out of the car, she's surprised by the excited child running to hug her. She can't help noticing how pretty Izzy looks, complimenting her, and the girl explains she'll have a ballet recital soon. A woman approaches, asking Izzy not to tire Juliet out. This is Mrs. Jane, the Korean mother of her friends. Despite keeping Theobald in her name even after marrying last year, that was her late husband's surname, so the correct one should be Morris. Even so, Juliet prefers to call her Mrs. Jane. She mentions the possibility of attending the recital. Mrs. Jane thinks it's a good idea and explains they'll be seeing her daughter's friends. She asks the redhead to sit down, but before she can, Izzy starts calling her to a safe corner because she needs to ask something. Izzy wants to talk about the boys who gave her candy on Cupid's Day, and just hearing that makes Juliet think, while her little sister might already be interested in dating one of them, at that same age, she was busy fighting off kids who pulled her ponytail. The child is focused, looking at her phone. Then she shows the boys. The first is Tony, who likes to prank her, and the other is David, who went to the same preschool as her, but she finds him a bit boring. Driven by curiosity, Juliet remembers she's always posting on TikTok, so she asks if she also has an Instagram account. But to Izzy, only old people use that, which is absurd since there's barely a 10-year age gap between them. Either way, the girl needs serious advice. Juliet asks if she really needs a boyfriend, advising that it has to be someone she truly likes, and the girl doesn't seem to feel that way about those boys. Hearing that, Izzy looks sad. To her, since they gave her candy, she should do something in return. The redhead says it's great that they like her, but that doesn't mean she has to go out with any of them. To her, that idea is ridiculous, and she can't believe she's giving romantic advice to an 8-year-old. But obviously, what Juliet tells her is to care about her own feelings. Their conversation is interrupted by Mrs. Jane announcing that they need to go. Izzy runs off as if nothing happened. The mother writes a note, asking Juliet to give it to her older son since he's apparently late for his volunteer work. Although it was Jane's idea to get Luke away from the computer, she regrets it now because he doesn't answer her calls anymore. Juliet jokes that it's pretty common, saying Eddie used to do the same. Mrs. Jane remembers and hopes the boy's health has improved. Mrs. Jane tells her there are pies in the fridge and that she can help herself while waiting for Luke. Then the two say goodbye as they leave for the recital. Now alone, Juliet can think more clearly about her brother Eddie, who attends a private school for musically gifted students in New England. Unlike her, the boy's health is very fragile. He was often bedridden, but he never stopped loving music. When fragile Eddie applied to a boarding school to study his passion, their parents were, of course, against it. After all, they weren't very interested in the idea of leaving their poor, sickly son alone far away from them. But in the end, Eddie got what he wanted, which made Juliet think at the time that they would all move together. And her mother was even considering it, even if it meant leaving her father behind. If the housing costs had been more affordable, the redhead might be living in Massachusetts right now. Suddenly, she notices someone approaching. It's Luke, finally back. The boy looks different with that blank expression on his face. That makes Juliet worry that something's wrong. After all, he's usually cracking jokes and laughing. Then an idea pops into her head. Luke enters his house. Since everything's dark, he tries to turn on the light, but it doesn't seem to work. That's Juliet's plan to try and surprise him, but it backfires. Luke ends up being the one who surprises her and says she doesn't seem to be in a very comfortable position. The redhead asks if he's not supposed to be afraid of the dark, but that was a long time ago, back in elementary school. Juliet wants to know how he found out, and Luke reveals he saw her behind the desk, making her plan a complete failure. She even flipped the circuit breaker, and the boy says she could have hidden better. In her defense, Izzy always hides there, so she thought she could do the same. Luke asks if she'd been waiting for him all this time. Then she explains that his sister and mother went to the ballet recital, so she stayed there waiting for him, until she got the idea to play a little prank. Juliet remembers the note and hands it to him. Luke reads the message and explains that he needs to go upstairs to work on the rest of the algorithm since the contest deadline is approaching. He also has a quiz to study before, meaning he'll have to stay up all night. Hearing that, Juliet offers to help if it's repetitive work, but Luke questions why he'd let her do that if he can simply do it himself. He says it's fine, since he has to do it alone anyway. His words leave the redhead frozen. She expresses her concern, saying Luke could get expelled if he loses his scholarship for a semester. The boy went to West Milford on a full academic trip, so he's maintaining a high GPA to keep all his benefits. Not to mention he earns money developing apps and programs. Mr. Morris, the boy's stepfather, runs the largest pharmacy in Kansas, so Juliet knows they're not facing financial problems. But she doesn't think her friend feels very close to his stepfather yet, nor has he changed his surname. Finally, she remembers the bag. Before Luke can go upstairs, she calls out to him, asking if he knows that Jasmine went to his school. That catches his attention. He wants to know how they know each other, and Juliet reveals they study at the same place. She gives him the bag and explains that the girl couldn't go to her volunteer work. Even without opening it, Luke assumes it's the lunchbox she once lent him. Juliet still wants to know how Jasmine knew they were neighbors, suspecting he must have mentioned it himself. With the bag delivered, Luke says he needs to head upstairs. The redhead remains curious, but figures she can ask later, so she just tells her friend they can watch a movie together later. Her doubt isn't that important anyway, especially since her friend seems really tired. The day is very hot, and the girls thought that since it was September, the weather would be cooling down. Her friend took a good look at the redhead, complimenting her pleated skirt and wanting to know where she bought it. Juliet says she found it on sale at Dashwood and asks if her look is going to get rated. And of course, yes. Her amazing outfit gets an A grade, as the girl liked how the colors were combined and the vintage details. Another comment is about the shirt she wore last week, but her friend gives her extra points for putting together a combination that made it look new. Finally, after 5 years of friendship, she was rewarded. Abigail compliments her friend's amazing body as well as her great eye for style, but laments that she doesn't show more interest in fashion. The problem is that back then, the redhead was a bit depressed after separating from Luke, and during that time she met the fashionista from California, becoming best friends. While grabbing her books from the locker, Abby says she found a skirt that looks great, especially in a forgotten town that doesn't even have a mall. She even says Juliet has everything it takes for them to be best friends. Suddenly, someone calls out to Jules, interrupting their girl talk. And of course, that makes Abby irritated. It's Gray, wanting to know if the redhead had a good tour with Romeo the day before. He's interested in knowing whether the new boy would like to join the football team. Juliet says the boy didn't seem interested and wants to know if they need more people on the team. Gray thinks for a moment. If the new guy is a rower, he must be in good shape. After all, the team's defense is pretty weak right now, and he thinks Romeo could try for a safety position. All the girl can say is that he should ask the new boy himself, since all she did was show him the school. The player tells her not to worry because he'll take care of it later. Meanwhile, Abby feels completely sidelined. As soon as Gray leaves, she asks why he's acting so friendly with Juliet. After all, he's so full of himself, thinking he's the best in school just because he's the quarterback. All that anger is because up until last year, Abby dated KJ, who was also on the football team, and now she can't stand seeing any of them, and Jules can't blame her. They dated for 3 years, and the redhead was impressed that her friend could become such a sweet girlfriend. Because of her, KJ gained celebrity status at school. Abby gave him everything he wanted, but their relationship ended when she caught KJ kissing Cynthia at a party. For Juliet, nothing good ever happens at parties. That day, she got there as fast as she could, but the chaos had already spread. She found her friend devastated, crying uncontrollably. That day, she didn't even know how to react or what to do. It still hurts just thinking about that day. As for the cheating, Abby doesn't believe it was just an impulsive kiss. She's sure the entire football team knew about KJ's affair with Cynthia and hid it from her. After all that drama, the cheaters didn't even last long together. They broke up only a month later. The story afterward was also quite messy, with KJ turning into an annoying, clingy guy trying everything to get Abby back and even slapping his mistress. All that was missing were a few illegal acts to make this whole drama a thrilling teen TV show. And that would be Romeo and Juliet if they were part of the Euphoria universe. Anyway, that's probably why the girl hates Gray, since he's the captain of the football team. Abby advises Juliet not to get too close to the player, saying it's bad luck to be around him. She also hates when Gray makes those pathetic attempts to flirt with her friend, but the redhead brushes it off. Juliet asks if he's not dating Veronica, and Abby says that detail wouldn't stop him. Guys like him don't care even when they already have a girlfriend. Earlier, it was so hot it felt like the sun was about to kiss the earth. But now, looking out the window, the weather has changed. Suddenly, the sky turned cloudy. At that moment, Jasmine appears, surprising Juliet. The girl wants to know about the bag she asked her to deliver to Luke, so Jules says she gave it to him. However, Jasmine curiously asks if the boy said anything about it. That makes the redhead wonder if Jasmine has a crush on him. But with a smile, all she says is that Luke thought it was the handkerchief she had lent him and went upstairs. Jasmine looks disappointed by the answer, making Jules believe she ruined their chance at romance. So she tries to make up for it, explaining that Luke is busy because he's preparing for a competition and studying for his biology exam, even adding that the boy hasn't talked to her in a while. This situation deeply touches Juliet, who tells the girl not to worry, assuring her that Luke will contact her soon. Immediately, she grabs her phone and messages her friend, asking if he saw what Jasmine gave him. He says no. She tells him to check and send a message to Jasmine. Suddenly, the noise around her catches Juliet's attention. Everyone is alarmed by the message they just received. It's an emergency alert. The warning is about a tornado on its way. Frightened, the redhead looks outside. It's already raining heavily. Seeing how things are, it's definitely not a false alarm. At the school, there are 3 tornado drills each semester, and it's pretty common for these alerts to go off during class. A woman approaches and asks Juliet if she'll help evacuate the freshmen. Since she's a senior, she could find the escape route with her eyes closed. But the freshmen, who started school just 2 weeks ago, don't know where to go. She then points them toward the basement and tells them to go up the stairs right ahead. She also warns them not to push and to walk calmly. One by one, Juliet makes sure they don't panic and turn everything into chaos. Soon, one particular freshman catches her attention. In the moment of crisis, Juliet's eyes meet Romeo's. He keeps looking at her until he turns his gaze to another freshman. Juliet is impressed that the boy is helping others, even though he's also new. The teacher shows up and thanks them both for helping, asking them to escort the others down to the safe area as well. As they walk calmly, Juliet comments on how loud the siren is, and the blonde agrees, saying he's going to go deaf from it since he can barely hear himself think. To him, it feels like they're in a disaster movie, like Titanic or Romeo and Juliet itself. Speaking of that, the Kansas Juliet joins in on the joke, saying one of them will probably have to die, or maybe both. Laughing at the joke, Romeo asks why it would have to be both, to which she replies that reckless people are always the first to go. The boy says they could be the protagonists of this movie. Juliet notices that his accent makes him sound so cool and calm even in this chaos. One thing the redhead is sure of, if she were the director of the movie, she'd never give the main characters such tragic names as Romeo and Juliet. When they enter the basement, they're surprised by how normal everything seems. Everyone is acting calmly. Romeo is shocked that everyone can stay so composed even with a tornado on the way. Soon the others notice them and want to know why they took so long. Some even teasingly ask if they were on a date. Juliet explains that they came from the West Building because they were helping the freshmen find the basement. Mr. Harrison is there too, taking notes while listening to her. He says the two of them seem to be enjoying each other's company quite a lot lately, and reminds them about appearing together in Nick's video. Annoyed, the girl explains that it was only because of the tour he assigned her, and she's not even surprised that he's a subscriber to the channel. The teacher even hints that no one wants to stop the relationship. Suddenly, in the middle of this stressful moment, Juliet realizes Abby isn't there. Then someone says she already went to Glenfield University for her fashion class. There's a message from her friend asking if she's okay, and the redhead also notices that the Wi-Fi signal is weak. She'll have to compete with everyone else to use it. Meanwhile, Romeo is surrounded by classmates. One of them jokes that the new guy is finally getting a real taste of Kansas life. They're curious if there are tornadoes in England too. Romeo says there are, but they're rare and much smaller than this one, so he's never had to take shelter in a basement before. Speaking of tornadoes, he notices one forming outside. And of course there is, since he's also a rookie when it comes to natural disasters. One of the boys tells a story about the time the roof of their elementary school was blown off, which leaves Romeo astonished. Each student shares their own experience. One says his elementary school didn't even have a shelter, so during drills they had to line up against the hallway wall since the center of a building is the safest place during a tornado. Benjamin takes the chance to explain that you should stay away from any windows and hide under a table if there's nowhere else to go. A bathtub or closet also works, as long as it's sturdy. Then a discussion starts about what you can or can't do during a chaotic moment like this. Romeo, however, is more interested in hearing about the school Juliet used to attend. She says it had its own storm shelter. That catches her classmates' attention, and one of them thinks it sounds cool, imagining it like the Batcave. Another student says everyone cried the first time they had to take shelter, except for Gray, since he was too busy pulling Juliet's hair while they were down there. Speaking of the captain, he hears his name and asks if they're talking about him. Without answering and with an unfriendly look, the redhead stares at him and denies it. When the storm passes, Juliet is safe, telling Luke about her experience and talking. The boy asks if the reason she didn't answer his message was because she was being evacuated. He looks as tired as a zombie, having slept at 4 a.m., yet still came to check on his friend. She apologizes, explaining that she turned off her phone while in the basement. Luke asks if she's still friends with Grey Holt, which irritates her since she was never anything to him. Theobald still remembers him, since they all went to the same elementary school together. Changing the subject, Juliet asks if he saw what Jasmine had given him, but as mentioned before, it's the handkerchief she lent him. Luke says he's not sure when the girl saw it, but that she asked to borrow it out of nowhere. Then she said she'd wash it because it got dirty. The boy also shows the fabric perfume that was in the bag she gave him. Immediately, Juliet takes it from his hand to take a closer look, a gift that's far too expensive just for borrowing a handkerchief. The redhead laughs and asks if Jasmine is trying to hint that he smells bad, and of course, Luke denies it. Juliet opens Nick's video channel. She asks if he remembers Mr. Harrison. That man is hard to forget, and he hasn't changed one bit. Juliet talks about the teacher's attempts to pair her up with the new guy, and that's when she remembers that Romeo had never seen a tornado before. Luke, while reviewing the video, asks if she's talking about Montague, the one sitting next to her. She introduces Romeo Buchanan, the handsome new transfer student. Juliet hits play so they can watch from the beginning. Gray appears first, asking if it's working, and Nick explains that it's like an interview since he's in front of the camera. The first question is whether he's the quarterback of the football team. Juliet and Luke watch the video in silence. Next, Nick asks if that makes him the most popular guy in school. That makes the player flash that smug smile and say, "Do you really need to ask?" That irritating smile is what Juliet hates the most, and she makes a point to skip that part of the video. Hours pass, and soon it's dinner time. Anthony, her father, asks why Luke didn't stay for dinner, and his daughter explains that the boy just stopped by to say hi, and that he only slept 2 hours the previous night. He's sorry to hear that, since he hoped to return the favor to Mrs. Theobald for the delicious bulgogi, and his wife reminds him that she's now Mrs. Morris. Jennifer scolds him, saying he can't let that slide. It would be very rude to call her by the wrong name. She asks if Luke will also change his surname, but there's no certainty about that. Changing the subject, Juliet mentions that she hasn't seen much of her father around lately and asks if he's busy with work. The man explains that they're dealing with lawsuits over some of the clinical trials they oversee, and it's been a huge headache. Anthony works at the Glenfield University School of Medicine, known for its clinical research, and many of those studies are tied to pharmaceutical companies. During his research, he discovered possible data manipulation by a company called B&R. But the problem is that even if he found out who was behind the manipulation, he'd still have to face a massive pharmaceutical corporation. Not only that, but the company holds exclusive rights to the research data, leaving no chance for the trials to be objective. So the man asks, how can they be when they're using manipulated data? Jennifer is already annoyed with this story, while Juliet doesn't know what to say. Her mother asks to drop the subject. Then she asks her daughter how school was and how many AP classes she needs to take this semester. Juliet pauses to think. With a smile, she replies that it's only 4 and makes it clear she doesn't want to be judged, especially by her father, who would have taken more than that in her place. Which is true, since Anthony took all those classes when he was a freshman in high school, and Juliet calls him a do-it-all, just like Ben Weaver. They switch the topic to how they thought she was going to Yale, but she says that's an ambitious dream. Jennifer asks if she isn't good at writing essays, but admits that it takes more than that to get into a good college. Taking advantage of that and not wanting her grades to hold her back, her father asks if she shouldn't be more dedicated to her studies. So he suggests she sign up for one more additional class. That felt like hearing the scariest story of all. In class, the teacher asks if everyone received a copy of the syllabus. This is Mr. Kurtnell, the American history teacher, who asks them to take a look at the first lesson, and Juliet is excited about having managed to enroll in the extracurricular class. He explains the dynamic. Each student has been randomly assigned to a group, and they'll have about 1 month to prepare their presentations. Juliet reads the instructions on the paper. It's a research project about the history of the state they were assigned. She thinks about the possible options. Ohio would be interesting. They could talk about the Treaty of Greenville. Pennsylvania would be fun since that's where the Declaration of Independence was signed. Another good option for her would be Hawaii, as well as South Carolina, since it was the first state to leave the Union. And if she's really lucky, maybe even Washington. But nothing goes her way, and Juliet is placed in the Kansas group. That's too much for her. Plus, the textbook has over 300 pages, and all it says about the place is a single miserable line about how it became the 32nd state, and that its only notable attraction is a deserted state history museum. In other words, there's nothing to work with. To make matters worse, she ended up in the same group as Grey Holt. The boy immediately wants to pick a leader, so he asks if there are any volunteers. Her classmates are Charles Delaney Wynn, Belle Liu, and Arthur Chandler, none of whom seem interested. So the player suggests Juliet be the leader. Trying to emotionally manipulate her, he says his scholarship depends on this class and that he needs to get at least an A. But of course, Juliet refuses, telling him to take the lead himself. She'll help, but there's no way she's captaining this sinking ship. Gray agrees, while the others show no motivation at all. The player accepts the role of captain since no one else wants it. He even asks if anyone is against it, creating an awkward silence. To start, the redhead suggests they brainstorm some ideas for the research topic first. The two begin throwing ideas around. Meanwhile, Charles is too busy on his phone. They also come up with a few more ideas along the way, but Belle doesn't care about anything they're saying. They turn to books, taking notes for their research. At this point, Arthur is too tired to even listen. In the end, Gray is overly enthusiastic, convinced that what they've done is enough to earn them an A. Unlike him, Juliet is exhausted and unmotivated, saying that if they're lucky, they'll get a B at best. The player tries to cheer her up, saying he's counting on her, while the girl groans and asks why Mr. Curtnell had to put them together. Then Gray answers that it's because she's smart. That's completely surprising. It's the last kind of response she'd expect from someone like him. He questions whether she really believes the groups were randomly chosen, and if what he says is true, poor her for having to carry everyone in the project. Gray makes it clear that Juliet is supposed to be the brains behind everything. Hearing all that leaves the redhead completely stunned. Everyone knew it, except her. Juliet wonders if this class could possibly get any worse. At least she doesn't have to deal with it for long. And as soon as she leaves the room, exhausted, someone calls out to her. Romeo, with his usual charming smile, asks if she's having a rough day. She admits she is, explaining that it's an extra class, then asks if he's already getting used to things around there. The blonde says everything's still new, but that's what makes it interesting. To him, going to a co-ed school and wearing regular clothes makes him feel like he's in a Hollywood movie, which is a funny line to Juliet. Changing the subject, Romeo asks if she's sure she chose the astronomy club as her extracurricular activity. He reveals that he's thinking of joining the group too. Juliet asks if he's not interested in football. After all, Gray really wants him on the team. But although he finds it fun, the blonde admits he doesn't know much about the rules. That reminds her of when Luke said that only Americans like football. Returning to the topic of astronomy, Juliet explains that he should probably ask Nate about it, since he's the club president, and she offers to give him his number. At that moment, she's caught off guard when Romeo asks if he can have her number. The two then exchange numbers. After that, the new boy says he has to go. They say goodbye, each going their separate ways. Or at least he does, because Juliet stays in the same spot staring at her phone. Seeing the first name saved makes the redhead think that maybe Romeo doesn't like being called just by his last name. And there's one thing she realizes. Romeo didn't ask for Nate's number. As classes go on, it becomes clear that the American History Project group is on the verge of disaster. Belle simply turned in her part of the assignment, which is completely irrelevant. Worse yet, she thinks she can leave after submitting something that bad. For Juliet, it's already bad enough that her teammates aren't putting in any effort, but they don't even seem ashamed about it. Belle, for instance, brought something about the Zhou dynasty, and some of them didn't even show up to class. Like Arthur, Gray has become their last hope, especially since Mr. Curtnell said they can't switch groups. The two meet up to come up with some kind of plan for the project, but the rest of the team isn't there. Either way, Gray only invited Juliet since he doesn't have the others' numbers, and even if he did, they wouldn't bother to work anyway. Juliet sits beside the player and asks if Arthur Chandler is still absent. He's known at school for selling illegal stuff, and even though Gray got his number from the football guys, apparently Arthur only replies when it's about offering his merchandise. The redhead feels like the unluckiest person alive. Still, they're the only ones who can work on the project right now. So Gray takes the initiative, saying they'll decide on a research topic and divide the work later. They lay out the books on the table. Gray and Juliet focus on their tasks. Time passes slowly. In fact, after less than an hour of studying, they're already burned out. The only topic they can think of for the project is a civil conflict that took place in Kansas in the 1800s. But that would be too obvious, and they'd never get an A with something like that. Gray even suggests asking about it on Quora, but the redhead immediately refuses. They both know how the teacher handles plagiarism cases. Then the player proposes writing about what Kansas was like during World War II. They could talk about how they built ammunition supply bases and military equipment factories. The idea sounds good, and Juliet says it just needs a few adjustments. Maybe they could focus on how those facilities help the state's economic development. Suddenly, the player takes out a lollipop, saying he needs a little sugar, and offers her one. Curious, Juliet asks if he always carries candy around, but finds out that some girls gave them to him earlier as a good luck charm for next week's game. Juliet actually thinks it's kind of cute that they wrapped the candies in school colors. And while the yellow one is vanilla, the blue one tastes like cotton candy. The two go back to discussing the project, not noticing the footsteps of someone approaching. A boy joins them, saying these library addicts look way too comfortable with each other, even daring to ask if they're on a date. It's the infamous KJ McCarthy, the guy who cheated on her friend. Irritated, Juliet says she didn't realize they were talking again, and she's absolutely right not to want any contact with him. But KJ doesn't care, saying she doesn't need to be mean, then pulls up a chair to sit down. The cheater says that even if Abby is still mad, he holds no grudge against Juliet, asking if they can just leave the past behind and be friends again. That's when Gray cuts in, wanting to know what the guy's even doing there. KJ reminds the captain about practice at 4 p.m., but he also says Coach Russell doesn't mind Gray working on a group project. He just warned that if he's late for practice, he'll have to run extra laps. Meanwhile, the girls nearby listen in, getting excited that there are football players in the library. Gray and KJ then start bickering over the candy. All that chaos pushes Juliet to her limit, and frustrated, she says there's no way to get any work done like this. She tells them to leave. After all, they have practice to get to. The redhead turns to Gray, saying that now she at least has a basic idea of what they should do for the project since the World War II topic was a great suggestion. Smiling, the captain says he'll text her after the game. All Juliet asks is that he focus on winning. The two then leave the library. As they walk side by side, Juliet notices something. Veronica is staring at them, and she doesn't look happy to see them together. Juliet wonders if she should explain why they're together. After all, she has zero interest in the blonde's boyfriend. But that's not her problem anyway. They're just working on a group project. Nothing more. Juliet's academic schedule stays busy after that, always filled with distractions until the weekend finally arrives. She's hanging out with Abby, who bombards her with questions, wanting to know if Romeo texted her or hit on her the other day. Juliet just replies that he got her number along with Nate's, which we know isn't true. But Abby doesn't believe it and says that obviously Romeo approached her with intentions. She has a feeling the blonde guy likes her friend. So she asks Juliet how she feels about him, but the redhead brushes it off, saying the new boy hasn't said a word since getting her number. Abby says whatever's going on between them, she warns her friend to be careful because RETs has been going crazy with posts about Romeo lately. Juliet is surprised people still use that. RET stands for Ravenwood Evening Telegraph, an anonymous website students use for gossip. The administrator calls herself Miss Reporter, who collects all the juicy stories and posts them on the site. Abby hated it when her story with KJ became the featured post. This time, the focus is on the new student, the CEO's son. Juliet is stunned, wondering how Miss Reporter knows everything when Romeo doesn't even have social media. Meanwhile, Abby wants to know who keeps sending her links. The site even goes down sometimes from so much traffic, yet she still gets them. The redhead laughs about it, hoping Miss Reporter keeps her identity a secret from Abby. Suddenly, a headline catches Juliet's attention. Who is football player Gray really dating? She doesn't even need to open the article to understand that the team captain must be tired of all the gossip surrounding his name. Since that doesn't interest her, she ignores it. The day is very sunny, and an event is taking place. At that moment, as if talking to a ghost, Nick thanks everyone for watching. It's for his followers, and he's streaming a video live from Ravenwood's rural football stadium for the long-awaited game, while Benjamin in the background has to explain who the blonde guy is talking to. As mentioned, it's the start of the football season, which has filled the entire school with a festive mood. Ravenwood had a big reputation for it. It was so popular that even people from neighboring towns came to watch. For those who weren't on the team, the biggest concern was what to wear on the day. Juliet could have been happy to pick out a nice outfit, but she really couldn't waste time this year because she had too much schoolwork to do, so she settled for a sweatshirt and flip-flops. Meanwhile, Nick keeps recording, explaining to his subscribers that this isn't just the season opener. They're also facing longtime rivals, Lowell Dalton. The players are entering the field. The Ravenwood High Blue Tornadoes shine under the leadership of Gray Holt. And of course, there's the beautiful cheer performance led by Veronica Adams. The crowd goes wild, shouting her name and showing how popular that girl is. But none of that is special to Juliet, who just watches everything calmly. Suddenly, she gets a message from Gray himself, saying he's had the best idea for their history project. At the same time she's surprised, the redhead gives a worried look. Why is the captain thinking about that right now, of all times? She wants his focus to be on the game. Speaking of the blonde, their eyes meet, and he waves, making her blush. The game begins, and the rivals go all out. In the bleachers, a man yells like a madman, furious that a player lost the ball. Juliet just lets out a nervous laugh. It's only just started, and incredibly, the rival team has already scored a touchdown. Ravenwood pushes forward, and people shout for them to block the right tackle. Another yells for the defense to hold strong. Everything seems to be going in the enemy's favor. They've already scored 13 points. That brings out the worst in people, and an irritated man starts calling Ravenwood worms, demanding the team get in sync instead of playing like a disorganized mess. With the score at 3-22, the dark-haired man is on the verge of a nervous breakdown, shouting that even he could run across the field faster. The first quarter was utterly embarrassing. If they keep playing like this, Ravenwood will lose. For some, it already feels like a waste of time. The second half begins, and the quarterback has the ball. He passes between two rival players, players, and here we see why Gray Holt is the best. With only 15 meters left, he makes it through, scoring a total of 10 points for the home team. Finally, everyone can cheer with joy at the show the Tornadoes put on. The team just needs to keep it up. Time passes, and while Ravenwood has 22 points, Lowell Dalton is at 28. Nick, still recording, narrates that they're in the final quarter, which makes the tension skyrocket, all while he's hyperventilating. It's the third down with 40 yards to go. The ball is with the Blue Tornadoes. Gray passes it to the running back, but the one who actually catches it is the receiver. It was a daring play meant to trick the opposing team. Now there are only 15 meters left for the final play. 10 left, and everyone's nerves are on edge as they watch. 5 meters, and no other player manages to stop him. Then, touchdown at the last moment. With 35 points, the Blue Tornadoes win the game. Everyone celebrates this happy ending. That afternoon, the game ended with applause from the crowd, and that victory made Juliet feel like her senior year was off to a great start. The homecoming dance was also only 2 weeks away. The girls were excited, already preparing for the big moment. They called Juliet over to get her opinion. They wanted to know if they were picking a suitable dress, afraid of choosing something too flashy or revealing. One of them even wanted a model inspired by celebrity fashion. Juliet picked one that fit snugly around the shoulders, agreeing with the girl in the green shirt, saying it would look great paired with strappy heels, at least according to one of the girls' opinions. At that moment, Abby arrived, surprising her friend with a smile and asking if she wanted to see hers too. She had made a wonderful dress that deeply impressed the redhead with its perfection. Although Juliet thought it was beautiful, it was still a basic design. Taking a closer look, Juliet suggested adding some lace. Abby asked if she meant on the hemline, thinking it was a good idea. The two were interrupted when a woman announced that voting for homecoming king and queen would begin next week. She had just received the link about it. She said that Gray and Veronica would probably be crowned again this year, which surprised no one, and Juliet didn't care at all. But Penny commented that the player should stay alert, because this time there was another strong contender in the race. Speaking of him, Romeo appeared, greeting Juliet. The redhead was a little startled for not having noticed his arrival. He wanted to know what Hoko Spirit Week meant. It referred to the homecoming event being advertised on flyers all over campus. Meanwhile, the girls were whispering about how convincing a candidate he was, and even decided to vote on the spot. Back to Romeo. He said the festivity reminded him of the summer ball, a summer dance held at British high schools and universities. After understanding what homecoming was, he was still confused about Spirit Week, thinking it might be a charity event for religious groups. That surprised Juliet, who thought school events were the same everywhere in the world. Homecoming Day usually takes place on the day of the big game against a rival school, and it's called that because many people, including alumni now in college, come back to watch. Students refer to the week of the game as Spirit Week, and each day has a theme. For example, if Monday were Cowboy Day, students would dress accordingly, and Tuesday might be Superhero Day, and so on. After hearing all that, Romeo said it sounded like a week-long Halloween celebration. Juliet gave a small smile. She had never thought of it that way before. That day was a complicated one for the redhead. In addition to her other responsibilities, she was working hard on the group project, still unable to find those lazy American history teammates. Benjamin had helped by giving her their numbers, but she still had no luck. The girl rushed into the library, which made the librarian happy to see her visiting so often. Even though she had Gray in her group, Juliet still wanted to try to get some things done. At the table beside her, the redhead noticed a book by Tom Wolfe that caught her attention, and soon a voice behind her commented that she looked busy. Romeo was there. With a smile, he said it was funny running into her again. Juliet found out it was him reading that book and was surprised that the boy liked Macbeth and Tom Wolfe, thinking his taste was eccentric. Since The Bonfire of the Vanities was a satirical novel depicting the excesses of 1980s America, he noticed her reaction, and the redhead asked him not to take it the wrong way. She liked the author too. Before she could finish her sentence, Romeo asked if she thought the book was too American, as if he had read her mind, but apparently that was the point. He was using it for a literature project. Suddenly, the two fell silent. Then Romeo took the chance to ask if anyone had invited her to the homecoming dance, and if not, he asked if she'd like to go with him. That caught her completely off guard. No one saw that coming, or maybe only the protagonist didn't. Juliet asked if this was supposed to be a date, and besides confirming it, the blonde added, "I've heard that all beautiful girls are easy to win over," and yet she still wasn't sure if it was flirting. The redhead didn't answer. She only asked if it wasn't too early for an invitation, since people usually did that during Spirit Week. Without missing a beat, Romeo asked if she'd rather he invite her again 2 weeks later, but that wasn't necessary. Either way, the two were going together. She hadn't told anyone about the invitation or that she was going with Romeo. After all, people still tried to make them the butt of their weak, unfunny jokes, and she didn't want to give them more reasons to laugh at their expense. Once again, Juliet was alone when someone came up asking why she hadn't gone to the party the previous night. It was Gray who didn't even bother to say hi, and she had no idea what he was talking about. The player explained that Josh had thrown a party to celebrate their big victory, and that it had been total chaos. The redhead had overheard people talking about it. She simply replied that she couldn't make it, but at least she watched the game. With a puppy dog look, Gray asked why she hadn't texted him. She threw it right back at him, asking if he had texted her. That only made the drama worse, because the player had texted her the night before, but it was just a jumble of words, making the redhead ask if he'd been drunk when he sent it. The boy apologized, saying he hadn't realized it would come across that badly. Changing the subject, Juliet asked about the great idea he'd mentioned during the game. It was about the rivalry between Kansas and Missouri, since those two states had always been rivals, so he suggested exploring it from a historical perspective. After all, Missouri had opposed Kansas in the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and also during the event they already planned to write about. Gray said those were examples they could use to show how the rivalry between the two had developed throughout American history. Finally, he asked if she thought the idea was amazing, and honestly, it was extremely clever. Even Juliet agreed, calling it brilliant. That only inflated the player's ego. Gray leaned closer to her and said he deserved a ride for that. And besides, he hadn't been able to sleep last night, thinking about all of it. All Juliet could do was ask what was wrong with taking the school bus, and he replied that it got so crowded they were packed in like sardines. And honestly, that's the worst. The blonde noticed Coach Russell waving for him, so he asked Juliet to wait for a moment. That made the redhead realize she always somehow ended up doing whatever he wanted. Juliet barely had a minute of peace before someone else showed up with questions, asking if the two of them were dating. They were sophomores and also on the cheer squad. The redhead asked if there was any problem giving a classmate a ride, but it didn't matter. The girl accused her anyway, asking what other reason she'd have for doing that. Juliet had no idea how long they'd been watching. Once again, Juliet explained what was going on and finished by asking if the interrogation was over, which only irritated the girl, who said they'd just asked a question. Out of patience for all that drama, the redhead said there was no reason to discuss her personal life with someone she barely knew, and if they wanted to know something, they could go ask Gray themselves. That seemed to scare the girls off, and they finally backed away, leaving Juliet in peace at last. First, Veronica had been staring at her, and now her minions. In the car, she was still annoyed, wondering whether people thought she was a pushover, or maybe she was overreacting. She caught Gray off guard by asking if he had a girlfriend. The guy said that was unexpected. More directly, she asked if he was dating Veronica, but they'd broken up a while ago. Gray wanted to know why she was asking, and she said it was just curiosity. But that topic only gave him more ammunition. He asked why she was suddenly so interested in his love life. Juliet just replied that she thought they were still together. The player didn't mind, and sounding cheerful, asked if she cared whether he was dating someone or not. The redhead denied it, saying she was just aware that he wasn't seeing anyone. Gray accepted her lack of interest, leaning back in the seat and pouting. That's when Juliet noticed something beside him that made her curious. He explained that the pile of papers was a copy of the playbook Coach Russell had given him, which he had to memorize completely. Suddenly, an idea struck him, one that broke the stereotype that all athletes were dumb. Gray suggested making a map. He explained they could create one showing the historical events that took place in Kansas and mentioned an app that could generate a 3D map based on a person's movements. Then he asked if they could take a drive and make one over the weekend, and Juliet agreed without hesitation. Talking about that reminded the redhead that homecoming festivals actually originated from rival football games between Kansas and Missouri. Gray was surprised and asked how she knew that. Juliet explained that she'd heard English schools didn't have such events, which made her research more about it. She discovered that the term spread to other states after originating in the early 1900s during an American football game between two rival colleges. The project would have to be presented during homecoming week, so Juliet suggested that Gray do the presentation wearing his football uniform, starting with homecoming and ending with bloody Kansas. She said Mr. Curtinell liked football enough to show up at games and wouldn't mind since Gray was the quarterback. Then she asked if that was enough for them to get an A. Gray, with pure excitement, could only say one word: wow. The blonde said he loved when she said it was possible for them to get a good grade, then got even more dramatic, saying it felt like scoring a touchdown and that he could win every game if she were there. Juliet told him he could be strangely convincing. Juliet had barely arrived home when she could already hear her parents arguing. Her mother was upset. Jennifer asked if the man wasn't being a bit irresponsible, since they could barely afford Eddie's health insurance. The company might be mixing something illegal into its products, but to her, that wasn't their problem. Anthony disagreed, even as his wife yelled that going against the company wouldn't help pay their son's tuition. As she climbed the stairs, Juliet thought about how much they'd been fighting lately. She kept listening and learned that her brother had a seizure after taking one of the medications. Jennifer was afraid they'd get sued since they didn't have the money to hire a lawyer. She decided she wouldn't take the blame for something that hadn't even happened yet. It was too much for Juliet. She collapsed on the floor and began crying over the situation. After calming down a little, she noticed a message from her best friend saying he'd finished his competition submission. Juliet wiped her tears and picked up her phone, asking if she could go with him to his volunteer work. Luke wanted to make sure she really wanted to go, warning that she wouldn't understand what people were saying and that it might not be fun. Smiling, Juliet said she'd be fine. She was just curious to see him in action and took the chance to compliment his jacket, saying whoever had given it to him had great taste. She was only promoting herself, of course, since she was the one who'd given it. They drove there in Theobald's car. Juliet asked when her friend started teaching Korean. It had only been a month. Still curious, she wanted to know what the students called him, and that's how she learned his Korean middle name was Jae-won Shin. Smiling, the redhead thought that was an interesting discovery. Luke looked at her, noticing how strange she seemed, but he said nothing, and even he wasn't exactly cheerful. When they arrived, they were bombarded with questions and had to explain that Juliet wasn't his girlfriend, just a friend. Some children surrounded teacher Jae-won Shin, full of excitement. They spoke to each other in Korean. Watching them, Juliet wondered if one of the words they said meant teacher. Thinking about it, she realized she had never heard Luke speak Korean before. After all, there weren't any other Koreans at their school or in the neighborhood, and her friend and his mother had always spoken English around her. He also never really talked about his maternal heritage, unless Juliet brought it up herself. The redhead then surprised him by saying she'd noticed his voice sounded different when he spoke Korean. He hadn't known that, and Juliet said she liked the sound. Smiling, she suggested maybe he could read her a bedtime story in Korean sometime when she couldn't sleep. She said his voice would be very pleasant to listen to. Embarrassed, Luke turned away, saying she could ask Siri for that instead, but her robotic voice wasn't nearly as nice as his. With that mechanical tone, it was easier to stay awake than to relax and sleep. In the classroom, teacher Jae-won wrote a few words on the board with their English translations. He looked toward his friend sitting in the class. Juliet was stuck on a question. Then her new friend whispered the correct answer to her. The two of them celebrated quietly. The scene was pleasant to Luke. Now it was just the two of them alone. Excited, Juliet praised him for being such a good teacher. After all, she'd had no trouble keeping up with the lesson. She said she should have asked him to teach her before. Then they could have been talking in Korean all along. Luke asked why she'd want that, and Juliet said it would be a way for no one else to understand what they were saying, like a secret code. Still concerned, Theobald took the chance to ask if she was feeling better, but they were interrupted when Jasmine entered the room. She looked surprised to see the redhead there. Juliet explained she was just sitting in on the class Luke was teaching. To her surprise, the girl started speaking in Korean, which caught Juliet completely off guard. But then Luke asked her to switch to English so Juliet wouldn't feel left out. And in truth, she was already starting to feel that way. Jasmine apologized, saying she hadn't said anything important. When the girl left, Juliet scolded her friend, saying he didn't have to be so direct. But he thought Jasmine had been rude. After all, it was unnecessary to speak Korean when there were 3 people in the room who could all speak English. Not to mention, she was in the same grade as them. So Luke said she was old enough to know better manners and told Juliet she didn't need to apologize for her. They were even in the same biology class. For Juliet, there was something about Jasmine that made her want to protect her. She seemed so delicate and fragile, like someone who needed to be handled with care. The girl radiated a kind of charm Juliet could never have. She wondered if maybe if she were more like Jasmine, people might treat her differently. It doesn't take long before she's back home. She's greeted by her mother, who asks about school and even notices that her daughter got home later than usual. Juliet lies, saying she was at the library, realizing they hadn't noticed her earlier arrival because they were too busy arguing. She notices clothes on the bed, probably her father's, left there when he changed before leaving. The girl takes a risk and asks if the two of them had another fight. Jennifer says it wasn't anything serious, just something between them. And then she says the classic line, "Let the adults handle it." Her parents always say that. They said the same thing when Eddie got sick, and also when they had to move to Kansas. Those weren't the only times. To her parents, no matter what happens to the family, Juliet is never allowed to say anything about it, as if her opinion or even her feelings don't matter at all. Lying in bed, Juliet thinks, why don't they tell me what's going on? Why can't I help? Or maybe they just don't really want her involved. Either way, the situation makes her deeply sad, because whether she wants to or not, she ends up affected by all their fights. She's sure her mother must be exhausted by all the confusion, so the redhead decides not to bring it up, to avoid stressing her out even more. The next day at school is chaos. As soon as she arrives, Nick, with his camera of course, asks when she started dating Gray. Even Penny wants to know if it's true they went on a date. Abby arrives just in time to hear that and immediately asks her friend about it. She says she approves of Romeo, but that the player is off limits, a sworn enemy, and Juliet has no idea what she's talking about. Her friend's concern is that she might be thinking of going to the dance with him, but the redhead explains they're only working on a project together. And besides, Romeo is the one she's going with. Abby relaxes at that, adding that at least the boy dresses well. Juliet doesn't understand why her friend cares about that detail, and she also wants to know if Abby's own date is going, since they could rent a limo together like they did for prom, but her friend says she can't afford it, and that wasn't the point of the question anyway. Juliet presses her, but Abby doesn't say anything else. She just glances at the clock. She dodges the subject, saying she has class and will explain later. Time passes, and she doesn't even send a message afterward, making Juliet feel tricked. Then someone calls her name. It's Nate, asking if she signed the attendance sheet. He's the president of the astronomy club. Time had flown by, and before she knew it, it was the day of the meeting. Sighing, Juliet says she didn't know it was possible to stargaze during the day. They're supposed to visit the Powell Observatory every 2 weeks at night according to the original plan, but today they'll stay at school to observe sunspots instead. Excited, Nate explains that the sun is the largest star, the brightest celestial body visible to the naked human eye. Romeo approaches Juliet, who's sitting on a bench looking exhausted, and asks if she's okay. Without much enthusiasm, she says she doesn't want to hear any jokes about redheads and sun sensitivity. After all, that's a sore spot. She used to get teased a lot as a kid for having red hair, and Luke had always tried to comfort her whenever it happened. Once, when they were younger, the boy did a whole research project about redheads having a mutated gene in their DNA. He explained that it allowed them to produce vitamin D without much sun exposure. That made Juliet cry, thinking it meant she was an alien. He tried to comfort her, but he wasn't very good at it. Romeo asks why he'd ever make fun of that. He says he had a red-headed friend back at his old school. They both lived in the dorms, so he knew all about the stockpile of sunscreen the guy kept. Juliet couldn't blame him for being that careful. Taking the moment, Juliet asks why he decided to come to Ravenwood, since there's a private school nearby. Romeo explains that he wanted to try something different while in Kansas. He had attended many private schools in England, and his brother gave him permission after he said the state's public schools were excellent. Juliet is surprised to learn he even has a brother, and finds out he's 18 years older than him, and that Romeo came here following him. Realizing that his brother would have been about their current age when Romeo was born, the redhead imagines he must have spoiled him a lot as a kid. But things are more complicated. He's actually Romeo's half-brother, born when their father was still with his ex-wife. Not wanting to judge too much, Juliet thinks about how brave he must have been to move to a different country with someone who's only a half-relative. Curious, Romeo asks if she has any siblings. Juliet says she has a younger brother who's a total brat, though they're not that far apart in age. Nate returns and starts reciting, "Took you long enough, but now you've woken up." Star-crossed lovers, Juliet immediately calls out to him. She threatens that if he calls them that again, she'll smash the telescope lens and use the glass shard on his eye. In his defense, the boy says he only meant that they'd love to see stars crossing. Juliet stomps on his foot. He thinks he's way too smooth, but Nate's still curious about something. He asks if the transfer student joined the club because of her. Juliet denies it, explaining that he just wanted to try something new while in Kansas. Even more curious, the president asks what the blonde used to do before. The redhead is about to answer, but stops when she notices Nate's strange grin. Then he bombards her with questions. If she already knows everything about Romeo, saying everyone's dying to find out why he joined the club, Nate says that if anyone has a question about the new guy, he'll just tell them to ask her. That makes Juliet regret everything, realizing she's dug her own grave. One way or another, fate seems determined to keep linking the two of them. Despite Nate's teasing, the astronomy club meeting ended without any problems. The real headache came the next day. Juliet was completely soaked. Jasmine apologized again for accidentally turning on the shower. She asked if the redhead was okay, saying she felt terribly guilty about what had happened. Jasmine even tried to make things better by saying Juliet still looked pretty even while drenched, and the redhead simply thanked her without making a fuss. In biology class, they had to dissect a squid. Somehow Juliet ended up partnered with KJ, her best friend's toxic ex. That was the worst thing that could have happened to her. Already out of patience, she told him that was enough and to leave the poor squid alone and just finish the lab report. But the boy was only worried about one thing. He asked if she'd already popped the squid's ink sac, making Juliet wonder how her friend managed to date him for 3 years. The redhead was about to tell him not to do it, but it was too late. She got completely splattered with black ink, and KJ apologized, saying it wasn't on purpose. Apparently, this just wasn't the protagonist's day. The player even joked that she looked good with black hair. asking if she wanted more, and promptly got a book thrown in his face. So Juliet had to turn on the shower and clean herself up. As if her day wasn't already ruined, someone shouted, "Look, it's the soaked ginger." The redhead told him to shut up, threatening to do the same thing she did to the idiot who got her dirty. But Gray didn't even flinch, saying not to worry because he was the best surgeon in this lab. Smiling, he joked that his patient could wake up any minute from a successful operation. But Juliet replied that the tentacled patient had already passed on to the other world, even wondering if the player had been watching Grey's Anatomy or something. Suddenly, he offered her his jacket. Juliet didn't understand why, and the player explained that since she was wet, she could use it. Grey stepped closer and said it would be autumn soon, so she should keep warm. Feeling how close he was, she turned away as she accepted the jacket anyway. Her clothes were completely soaked. She hadn't even realized it, since she'd been too worried about her hair. Jasmine called out to her. Once again, the girl apologized for what had happened earlier. Juliet tried to reassure her, saying her clothes would dry soon and that it was the last period anyway. After this class, she could go home and change. Then, out of nowhere, Jasmine asked if she was going to the dance with Grey. Obviously, Juliet denied that rumor, since that wasn't it. The brunette asked if Luke was taking her, but that was denied too. The redhead made it clear it was someone else, getting suspicious as to why Jasmine was suddenly asking about the dance. Jasmine took the chance to ask if it was okay to ask Luke to the dance. That caught the redhead completely off guard. Juliet just said she couldn't decide that for her and suggested she ask him directly. Jasmine explained she just wanted Juliet's opinion before asking Luke. The redhead made it clear that the two of them were just friends and that she didn't need her permission to invite him. Jasmine smiled, realizing she was right, and thanked her for it. Over the years, many girls had shown interest in Luke, often using Juliet as a way to get close to him, but she never expected someone as shy and reserved as Jasmine to take the first step, making her wonder if the girl really liked her friend that much. Class ended, but Juliet's streak of bad luck didn't. That morning, her car had been fine, but now one of the tires was flat. To make things worse, roadside assistance was going to take forever to arrive. Adding to everything, she got a message from Grey asking where she was. They needed to drive around Kansas for their group project. Things were getting pretty hectic lately, especially since the redhead also had a test coming up next week. Then Romeo approached, asking if she was waiting for someone, and she explained her little problem with the car tire. Like a gentleman, the boy offered to wait with her if she didn't mind, and said he wouldn't miss the school bus anyway, since he'd driven himself. The two of them sat down, and Juliet asked if he was used to driving yet. Romeo said yes, though he felt he needed more practice, since everything was the opposite of how it was in his country. In England, most people drive with a manual transmission and on the left side of the road. The redhead reassured him that he'd get the hang of it soon, adding that he didn't have to deal with heavy traffic in Kansas, and the roads were all pretty straightforward. Romeo agreed, saying the problem was that his date was an excellent driver, making him afraid of looking like an idiot when he drove her to the dance. That made her smile, and playing along, she said his date would understand even if he didn't drive perfectly. The blonde said that was exactly what he hoped she'd say. Then he asked, "Do you think she'd join me for a drive to the Powell Observatory for a little driving practice?" Juliet spends a moment staring at him, as if waiting for it to be a joke, but it's not. So she smiles and says she'd love to. She tells him she'll send her address so he can pick her up at 8 when they have their next astronomy club meeting. Romeo thanks her for giving him a chance. Some time passes and help finally arrives. The mechanic checks everything and comes to a conclusion. This was done deliberately. Both of them are confused. It turns out someone intentionally punctured the tire, and the man says that incidents like this are actually pretty common in high schools. And honestly, Juliet believes it was the minions taking revenge. Shocked by the news, Juliet wants to make sure she heard it right. The mechanic confirms it. For now, he can patch the hole, but it won't last long. Luckily, the tire itself is still in good condition, so she won't need to tow the car, but she'll have to take it to a shop to replace it. Later, she gets home and finds her mother on the laptop. The woman asks if something happened to the tire, since she remembers they replaced all of them not that long ago. When Juliet tells the story about the car, Romeo seemed genuinely alarmed and had asked her to check the dashcam footage, just in case. But they didn't find anything. Juliet doesn't want her mother to know all the details, and besides, she's not entirely sure herself that someone did it on purpose. Either way, her mom changes the subject. Jennifer says she got an email from the school. The woman demands an explanation, and Juliet bursts out saying, K.J. McCarthy started everything, and she's the victim in this story. Even so, she still got detention, which she thinks is completely unfair. But then her mother says something shocking. I can't remember a time when you got detention that didn't feel unfair to you. Juliet defends herself, saying she's never been in trouble since starting high school. Still, her mother says she can't deny Juliet caused plenty of problems a few years ago. That was when she was 14, like the time she defended Luke from a boy who was being mean to him. The redhead points out that was ages ago, but it doesn't convince Jennifer, who reminds her of the deal they made. Juliet had agreed to lose her driving privileges if she ever got in trouble at school. so her mother demands she hand over the car keys. However, since she's behaved well until now, Jennifer decides to punish her for only 2 weeks. The next day, Juliet already has to start taking the bus, which is not exactly exciting. She tried everything to get out of it, even playing the homework card, explaining she'd need the car on Saturday for a project, which was technically true, but it didn't work. Reluctantly, her mother allowed her to use it just for that one day, and she still had to hand over the keys. It's been almost half a year since she last had to ride the school bus, and what annoys her most is that it used to take only 15 minutes by car, but now it's 40, not to mention all the noise she has to endure during the trip. In class, the redhead asks if anyone has seen Charles Delaney win. No one knows who that is, so she explains he's the guy she's working with on the American History Project. Nick asks if that's the one dating Daisy, the girl with the bleached hair. Then everyone recognizes them as the couple with a serious case of PDA. They even saw them making out in the cafeteria the day before. The gossip spins from there, everyone saying how gross it was, though there's nothing they can do to stop them. Juliet shudders just hearing about it. Either way, she hasn't seen any sign of Charles this whole time. At the end of class, she bumps into someone in the hallway. It's Arthur, and she tells him she's been looking for him this whole time. The girl says she sent him a message earlier and asks if he saw it. Arthur looks awful, like he's never slept in his life. The only thing he asks is, "Do you need some too?" leaving her confused. She has no idea what he's talking about. Then Arthur shows the marks on his arm, and she finally understands. Juliet immediately says no, that's not why she's there. She explains she needs to talk to him about the American History Project. Confused, the boy says no one's ever sent him a Snapchat about schoolwork before and keeps insisting if she doesn't want a little boost. Either way, the redhead manages to get him to agree to show up for the group meeting this weekend. Juliet then gets a call from her mother, who says she left the car at the mechanic, but apparently it's going to take longer than expected, meaning Juliet won't be able to use it. The only solution is to ask Luke for help. She doesn't want to bother him with it, but she has no choice. Juliet takes a chance and sends the message, waiting for his reply. It doesn't take long. The answer is confusing. The boy says he doesn't know, and even hints he wants to know what he'd get in return if he helped. That makes Juliet wonder if it was really Luke who sent the message. But even if it's a little strange, she just goes along with it. In the end, the boy says that if she wants the car, she'll have to come to him. Juliet gets a ride from Abby. During the trip, the friends talk, and the brunette asks if she isn't overreacting. It's about Luke. She says the boy lives right next door, so there's no need for the redhead to go all the way to his school as if they hadn't seen each other for ages, or as if they were lovers. All Juliet asks is that she not get jealous. About 30 minutes earlier, the protagonist had asked Abby to drive her to West Milford because she felt something was wrong with her neighbor. The brunette changes the subject, now complaining about why Juliet has to work so hard on the project she's doing with Gray Holt, saying she'd have no problem lending her car. Juliet explains that she thought Abby would be busy making her dress for the dance, since she needed to go to the sewing lab. The redhead tells her friend she'll get a ride home with Luke anyway. After all, at some point, he'll have to go back home too. She gets dropped off at the school. Then she walks around the unfamiliar place. The place is big, and she thinks about asking Luke later to give her a tour. While she's distracted thinking about that, someone calls out, asking if she's Juliet. The redhead turns to see who it is, and apparently being the only redhead in Kansas, she wouldn't be surprised if rumors about her had spread, especially with such a well-known name. The boy introduces himself as Patrick, a friend of Luke's. Excited, Juliet says it's a pleasure to meet him and immediately asks about her neighbor. Breaking the cheerful mood, Patrick says he has something to tell her and that she shouldn't get upset about it. That alone makes her worried. She immediately asks if someone's been mean to Luke, but the boy assures her it's nothing like that. Then she thinks it must be about the weird message her friend sent, like he was drunk, and Patrick asks her to calm down so he can explain. First of all, he assures her Luke wasn't hurt, so there's no need to worry about his safety. The reason she's there, though, is that she supposedly needs to prepare about $10,000 for his ransom, but it's all just a joke. The truth is, Luke's phone was hacked, and that explained all those strange messages. In the classroom, Patrick explains what happened in more detail. He says they're both in an app development club and some guys hacked Luke's phone as a kind of challenge. Since Luke has a reputation for keeping his phone security extremely tight, they only tried to do it when Theobald wasn't around, but then his phone suddenly started ringing and they got locked out. Patrick points at the nervous Toni Emerson, one of the geniuses who tried to do it. The boy apologizes, saying he didn't think she'd actually come. Either way, Juliet thanks them for inviting her to see the nice school they study at. Still embarrassed, Toni says he's glad she stopped by and asks if she came because of the message he sent. Patrick answers for her, saying the boy made her worry. Tony apologizes again for what happened. Then Patrick scolds him, asking why he did something like that. So the boy accuses him back, saying he was curious too about who Juliet was. The redhead is surprised they were all curious about her. They chuckle, realizing they've been caught. Patrick tells her the West Milford dorms are really nice and that Luke's grades are high enough for him to have his own room. However, he refuses to live there, traveling almost an hour each day to go home. Tony adds that after some digging here and there, they eventually discovered something. Luke had put everyone's chat on mute, except for one girl named Juliet. That's when the redhead understands why the boys were so curious to meet her. Patrick explains that whenever they asked about her, all Luke would say was that she was just a friend, which only made them more anxious to find out why he was being so secretive about it. A boy with glasses walks into the room, complaining that his stomach hurts. He feels sick from eating too much popcorn. The three of them fall completely silent, as does he, once he notices a girl is in the room. Juliet looks at the boy curiously. He, in turn, wants to know who she is. So Tony tells him this is Juliet, the one everyone's been talking about. The boy immediately starts firing questions, asking if she's really Luke's friend who lives next door. He complains about how unfair life is and calls Theobald Peter Parker. He dramatically cries, calling Luke Skywalker a traitor, saying they were supposed to be Star Wars fans forever. Ignoring the drama, Juliet asks when her friend will be back. Patrick first apologizes for the noisy boys, but she says it's fine. Then asks if they're always like this. But they're just nerdy guys, and normally the place is dark and quiet. All they do is write code. Patrick says they usually just stare at their computer screens all day, and it's only today that everyone's so excited because she's there. Then someone else walks in, calling out her name. Everyone turns toward the newcomer, Luke. Confused, Theobald asks his friend what she's doing there. Then they reveal they invited her because they were dying to meet the girl who lives next door. The two stare at each other. Juliet takes the first step, smiling and calling him by his nickname, Lukey Duck. Patrick comes back into the room carrying a few cans of soda and curiously asks the redhead if she's never been to the school before. Meanwhile, Tony offers to take the boy with the stomach ache to the nurse's office. Answering the question, Juliet says it's her first time there. She also admits she didn't know the place was open to visitors. Using Luke's affectionate nickname, Patrick says he's disappointed, asking if that's really how she treats close friends. Theobald's answer is that there wasn't much to see there anyway, and besides, her school is pretty far away. A little conspiracy forms, since it would only be a 30-minute trip, shorter than Luke's daily commute home. Curious, Juliet asks how the two of them became friends. Still teasing, Patrick asks Lukey Duck if he remembers when they met, leaving him to explain it was during floor hockey in 7th grade. For him, the memory is as clear as day. He tells the story of how he'd asked Theobald how to put on his helmet, thinking he was super smart. And in the end, neither of them had any idea. They struggled with it so much that by the time the game started, they were completely exhausted. And obviously they lost. From what Patrick remembers, they didn't even bother learning each other's names afterward. As they leave, Luke checks his phone messages and asks how the redhead could possibly think he'd send something like that. Juliet defends herself, saying he was the one texting all those weird things and then suddenly stopped responding, which really worried her. He asks if she really had to come all the way to his school, but she doesn't regret it and says she knows he would have done the same. Luke asks if she drove herself, then finds out Abby dropped her off. After all, that's what friends are for. Theobald looks behind him, asking Patrick why he's following them. The boy just says he wanted to watch them leave. Luke finds it odd since Patrick has never walked him to the car in the 5 years they've known each other, but Patrick just shrugs. There's a first time for everything. Juliet, watching their interaction, finds the whole thing amusing. It's funny to see someone cheerful enough to balance out Theobald's grumpy side. She comments that she didn't even imagine Luke had a friend at school. Patrick agrees, saying their friend is such a nerd that no one can blame her for thinking that. Tired of being the center of attention, Luke says he's glad they have so much to talk about. That only gives Patrick more fuel. He says, "The best friend of my best friend is also my best friend." Luke denies that they're anything like that, but Patrick doesn't care. Whether Luke likes it or not, that's how it is. Excited, the boy says that if Juliet doesn't believe him, they can exchange numbers so he can show her how Luke appears as his best friend on Snapchat. The redhead says no, that she and Luke don't even use the app, leaving Patrick surprised, saying they're not as close as he thought. She says it's no problem. Whenever they need to talk, they just go to each other in person. Theobald listens to that, visibly uncomfortable. In the car, the redhead comments how easy it is to talk to Patrick. Juliet says she bets he gets along well with everyone, but Luke doesn't pay much attention. He just agrees unenthusiastically. She asks if the two of them aren't close since she assumed they were on Snapchat together, but he explains it's only because they have to talk about an app they're developing. Juliet knows her friend would never act that relaxed and easygoing unless he was close to them, but she keeps that thought to herself. Noticing her silence, Luke suddenly asks what's wrong. Without going into detail, she just says it makes her feel a little sad. The fact that she didn't know he had other close friends? Since they go to different schools, it's natural they'd meet new people, just like she has Abby. But then Luke says something touching. He tells her he's not as close to the guys as he is to her. Juliet doesn't know what to say, and she doesn't even know why she feels this way. She's not sure if she's really sad because Luke never told her about his other friends, or because she doesn't like the idea of him having friends closer than the two of them are. She ends up realizing she's jealous of it all, but she doesn't want to be immature or hypocritical. After all, she has Abby, and if she had to choose between them, she probably couldn't either. With a sad expression, Juliet looks at him. Luke seems calm, keeping his eyes on the road. Not showing her insecurity, the redhead says that even so, next time he makes new friends, he should introduce them to her. Theobald says he will, then changes the subject, wanting to know why she wanted to borrow his car. Juliet tells him about the detention and the flat tire. Luke isn't surprised that the bully KJ is still as annoying as ever, but he is surprised the guy's still on the team. From what he's heard, they should have kicked him out already for misconduct. Still, despite being an idiot, KJ's a good receiver and hasn't done anything bad enough to justify being expelled. Luke already knows she needs the car for the project, but asks who's going to drive. Juliet says she will, and if he's worried about insurance, she'll ask Gray if they can use his car instead. Theobald reacts oddly to that. He even suggests he should be the one to drive. Juliet asks if he'll be free the next day. Luke asks if all he has to do is drive along the route, then suggests he could even help record the site using his drone. That excites the redhead. She loves the idea. He just wants to combine the useful with the practical, since he needed to run a flight test anyway, so he might as well do it this week instead of next. For some reason, that makes Juliet think back to all the fights she's had with her project partners, realizing that maybe, somehow, she's finally being rewarded for all her hard work, especially after redoing everyone else's half-baked efforts. With the two of them sitting in silence and still a long way from home, Juliet decides to start a conversation about Jasmine. Her intention was to talk about the dance, but she realizes that might not be such a good idea, since the girl will probably be the one to ask her friend. She doesn't want to ruin Jasmine's plans, so instead she says she was just about to ask if Luke knows that the two of them are in the same class along with KJ. The boy doesn't say anything, just listens. Back home, Juliet is on a video call with Izzy, who complains that the redhead hasn't visited her in ages, and even thinks she might be fighting with her brother. Juliet denies that anything like that happened. Even so, the little girl is already ready to teach Luke a lesson for being mean, kicking him out of the house if necessary. Once again, the redhead insists they didn't fight and tells her she shouldn't do that to her older brother. The conversation is interrupted by another call, and Juliet says goodbye to the girl, promising to text later. She answers the new call. Gray looks awful and is coughing. Juliet immediately realizes something is wrong, especially with his voice, and asks if he's sick. The player tries to brush it off, saying he just woke up, but he can't keep up the act for long. He's clearly feeling bad. Concerned, the redhead asks if he can even move around. He insists he's not that bad. She figures he's feeling this way because he overdid it at the game the day before, which she didn't even know had lasted 4 hours. Gray reminds her that even in DMs she ghosted him, so she never saw his invite to the after-game hangout. Juliet apologizes, saying she never checks those messages, but changes the subject to ask if he's really sure he's okay to meet for their project. That's exactly why he called her in the first place. But first, the player asks that they meet in person. Juliet gets there first. It's a really cute, cozy cafe. Soon, Gray arrives, and seeing his condition, the redhead asks if he's sure he's fine. He insists he is, saying he even walked a few laps around the block. Juliet gives him a worried look, cornering him about it, since earlier he'd said he was sore from head to toe. Smiling, he says the solution is to stay active. His muscles loosen up faster that way. The two pick a table and start working on the project. Gray tells her he finished the PowerPoint last night before bed. Juliet is surprised when he hands her his flash drive. She hadn't expected him to actually do it, especially after all that partying. But as always, he keeps surprising her. After spending some time together, she realizes the player is surprisingly dedicated when it comes to his goals. He's always joking around and being the class clown, so no one would expect it. Gray sighs, lamenting that they're probably the only ones wasting such a nice day on this stupid project, making Juliet wonder if all athletes are like that. But they're not. The Rhode Island group is also meeting. Gray asks if Benjamin is part of that group. Juliet confirms, revealing that they even put together a little skit about the rebellion and are using the day to rehearse. Now, in full competitive mode, Gray says they can't lose to the Rhode Island group and asks if she doesn't think they have a reason to be the best. Juliet looks at him calmly. She asks if it wouldn't be cool to make a video using drone footage, and mentions that Luke knows how to do it. Still trying to remember who that is, Gray asks if she's still friends with him. Juliet says yes, of course. They're neighbors. She sighs, saying it's funny that the only thing boys remember about each other is that dumb 5th grade play. Back on topic, the redhead confirms that her friend will help with the drone recordings since he's good with tech. and mentions that Luke goes to West Milford. The player doesn't know much about the place and asks if it's not some kind of nerd school, so Juliet explains that it's an elite private academy you have to pass an entrance exam to get into. Gray tries to be funny, asking if she already knew that. Then he bursts out laughing. The player jokes that going to a school like that probably means Theobald will end up in Silicon Valley after graduation. He describes how his uniform will be replaced with one of those wool vests, looking like all the other tech bros from a startup. Juliet doesn't laugh and asks if he's making fun of her friend, but Gray admits he's just jealous, and then asks where she plans to go to college. The redhead says she's applying to the same school he is, Kansas University. Staying on the subject, the player reveals he's been training hard to earn a spot at NK State, something a bit different, and she agrees that their approaches are like comparing apples to oranges. After that, they get back to work on the project. They finish after a while, both completely exhausted. Gray stands up, ready to leave, but Juliet reminds him that he's the group leader. He nods, saying he's giving 110% and even agrees to do the presentation in front of the class. What he didn't count on was dealing with a total workaholic. It's been 10 minutes since the redhead said they'd only leave after one last look at the slides. Finally, they're done and the player hurries to get food, dramatically saying he thought he'd pass out from waiting so long. They share a meal while chatting about random things. For dessert, they get ice cream. As they walk, the player starts snapping his fingers to a rhythm. Then he starts dancing, making her laugh. And honestly, he can be pretty funny without being annoying. They stop to buy snacks, and Juliet is amazed at how much he buys. But Gray has an answer for everything. He'll just eat the leftovers. He grabs a sandwich, says it's good, and gives it 2 Gracelyn stars. Juliet's surprised it's not 3, but he says his standards are higher than she thinks. Noticing the heavy bags, Juliet offers to carry some drinks. Gray asks if she knows how many defenders a quarterback has to get through during a pass rush. It's 5, including the middle linebacker, and each of those guys weighs well over 100 kilos. So yeah, he can handle a few small bags. Juliet doesn't quite follow his logic, but all Gray wants to prove is that he's a football player, and admitting it's heavy would be humiliating. That makes the redhead give her best smile, and he looks at her with admiration. "Juliet?" Gray says. She turns to face him, expecting anything except this. Gray, who had always teased her by calling her Ginger, says her hair looks even redder under the sunlight, its color almost resembling pomegranate juice. A little uncomfortable, she agrees. Then the boy surprises her by asking if he can touch it. Even though she's unsure and hesitant, Juliet lets him. Gray steps closer and runs his fingers through her silky red hair. For a moment, their eyes meet, but the girl breaks the tension by saying that at least he's finally learned a bit of good manners, and she can't really blame him, considering this is the same person who spent their entire childhood annoying her. She reminds him that back then, he didn't even ask permission to touch her hair. In fact, he used to pull it. Gray recalls that she'd completely lose it and freak out every time he did that, so there's no way he could forget. But that's not exactly a happy memory for Juliet. The protagonist wonders why he's staring at her hair as if he's never seen red hair before. Gray doesn't back down, saying no one else at school has hair as vividly red as hers, so it's better to look at it and appreciate it in person. Then Juliet makes a point of mentioning Bruno O'Connell, a senior from their freshman year. But to Gray, that doesn't count, and he's surprised she can even remember someone from back then. Juliet, on the other hand, is shocked he doesn't remember, since Bruno was also very redheaded. They head back to her house and find Luke already outside, testing his drone settings. From afar, Gray observes and comments that Theobald looks taller than the last time he saw him. Juliet asks the obvious question, did he think Luke would just stop growing? Luke doesn't respond, but Gray doesn't either, joking that back in 5th grade, Luke was shorter than her. Juliet quickly reminds him that he used to be shorter too, and of course, Gray Holt denies it. What he didn't count on is that Juliet has a photo of the 3 of them together, proving both boys were shorter than her until 6th grade. Dropping the subject, the redhead walks up to Luke, asking him to unlock the car so they can load their things inside. She tells them she'll be quick. She just needs to grab the rest of her stuff from her room. Before disappearing from view, Juliet tells them to save the chatter for later and focus on loading the car. She goes inside, leaving the boys alone. They greet each other, breaking the awkward silence. Gray takes the chance to bring up the earlier topic, asking if he was taller back in 5th grade, but Theobald says he doesn't remember, and adds that the last time they saw each other was 4 years ago. The player starts small talk, asking if that's Luke's car. Luke confirms, explaining he's been using it to get to school since 2 years ago. Knowing he goes to West Milford, Gray doesn't understand why he needs it if it's a boarding school. He then finds out Luke doesn't live in the dorms and prefers commuting home instead. That shocks Gray. He asks if he really does that every single day. Luke doesn't answer, his expression turning somber. Instead, he asks if Gray ran into Juliet on the way there, but the player reveals they'd been together since earlier that morning, working on the project. He even adds that it was at that German cafe, where he's heard Juliet goes often. That visibly affects Luke, who clenches his fist. But before anything else can happen, Juliet finally shows up, apologizing for taking so long, but at least she found what she needed. She says the rest of the group is on their way, so they'll be able to leave soon. Her smile fades when she notices something's wrong. The bag is still on the ground because neither of them did what she asked. Gray answers first, saying they were just reminiscing about old times, but she still wants to know why they just left the food lying there. Then Luke notices what's in her hand and asks if that's a Letterman jacket. Juliet explains that Gray lent it to her, which makes Luke bombard her with questions, trying to understand why she'd take something like that. Juliet has to remind him about the incident with KJ that she told him about earlier. Luke asks a strange question, wondering if the player took the jacket off his own back just for her. Gray breaks their tension by asking Theobald if he can sit in the passenger seat since he knows the route. The one who answers is Juliet, saying it's fine. No need to be formal about it. Completely unaware she's standing right in the middle of a storm. Soon the rest of the group arrives. And overall, they've done a great job with the project. Arthur, holding the camera, asks if he took enough pictures. Meanwhile, Gray grows curious about what's following them. It's just Luke's drone, flying along the planned route. Belle, with the laptop, asks for the footage so she can start editing. All that teamwork makes Juliet proud. They finally stop and get out to stretch their legs, and the protagonist still wears a big smile. Juliet asks Gray if he's happy he managed to get the other two to show up, and he playfully says he's so touched he could cry. Then Belle calls the redhead over, immediately making her worry. It's about Luke. She wants to ask something. She says she couldn't help but notice that the boy is completely her type. Juliet can't believe what she just heard. She truly wasn't expecting that. Belle asks more questions, wanting to know if Luke is really Korean and if he likes K-pop. About 30 minutes earlier, the girl had gotten excited when she found out that Theobald spoke Korean. She then revealed that she was a K-pop fan, but that's not really something he's interested in. Belle keeps going, wanting to know if he's ever done things like go to karaoke, visit a sauna, or any of those stereotypical Korean activities. But Luke has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. Back to the present moment, Juliet says her friend wouldn't find that kind of thing attractive anyway, though the other girl insists she'll only be interested if Luke knows how to dance. Another school day begins. Juliet explains to her friend that she's looking over the flyers for the charity welcome event, where people donate $1 to vote on a new hairstyle for the members of the student council. Abby comments that all those preparations make it really feel like the event is getting close. She notices that one of the hairstyles up for voting is Benjamin's, and she gets the idea to vote for the mohawk. After all, she thinks the president's current style is too boring, so a change is needed. The redhead, however, can't imagine him with a mohawk. Abby asks if she's already picked a dress for graduation, and Juliet says she'll probably reuse one of the dresses she bought for the spring dance. The fashion-loving friend shows her own dress, which she's still working on. It's really beautiful, but according to Abby, it still needs lace on the collar and hemline. Juliet is excited to see how it'll turn out. After that, the redhead hits a rough patch. In class, she's completely overcome by exhaustion. That worries her friends, who immediately ask what's wrong. Juliet explains she's having a crisis because she's got piles of homework waiting for her at home, making her feel like Dorothy trapped in the Land of Oz. Abby offers her a snack so she can get the strength to defeat the Wicked Witch of homework and return to Kansas, nicknaming her Jularothy. Like any teenager, the redhead asks strangers online if it's crazy to take 5 advanced classes during her freshman year of high school. And here's the answer: yes. She feels like she's shot herself in the foot. Carrying a stack of heavy books only makes her day worse, and one of them slips from her arms. Luckily, it doesn't hit the floor. Romeo catches it and then asks if she needs help. The boy helps her sit down to rest and asks if all those books are for school. Juliet explains she still has to find a piece of 16th century literature that influenced the Pilgrims' migration to America. Laughing, he offers to help. Normally, the protagonist would refuse, but pressed for time, she thanks him. Actually, she's curious to know what Romeo's doing there, since she's noticed she sees him at the library quite often. He replies that it's because it's close to the guidance office, so he waits there for his turn, something that surprises Juliet, since most people would rather spend that time on their phones. But Romeo says he has fun exploring the school. And besides, he didn't use his phone much at his old school either. That surprises Juliet so much she's left speechless. And it actually makes sense. Since it's such a prestigious private school, he probably had plenty of other distractions. She even imagines him in the mornings playing polo on a horse named Hamlet or Macbeth. Then at lunch, he probably enjoyed cucumber sandwiches while reading Shakespeare's sonnets. Juliet even imagines a scene where the boy might have been punished for not reciting the Divine Comedy by heart. And outside school hours, he probably had deep discussions with his classmates over afternoon tea. But Romeo says his old school was more like a dungeon, cut off from civilization. Curious, he asks about her, noticing she also seems to like spending time at the library. Juliet explains that her mother writes for a living, so their house has always been full of books, and growing up in that kind of environment really encouraged her love for reading. Since no one in her family watches TV, they don't even have one at home. Curious, Romeo asks what she does when she wants to watch something. Juliet explains she always goes to her neighbor and best friend's house. She tells him more about Luke, how he studies at West Milford, and to her surprise, the blonde boy knows where that is. Romeo reveals that he once had an admission interview there, but chose to attend public school instead. Walking through the halls, the two are interrupted by Nick Alexander, who wants the redhead to join a special vlog. He even says they're really excited, but judging by Juliet's face, she's definitely not. She replies that she's so thrilled she'll just have to pass the opportunity on to someone else. At that moment, she notices a girl glaring at her, the same one who confronted her in the parking lot. Immediately, she asks the YouTuber if he knows her. It's Teresa, who shares a photography class with him. On the way to the counseling office, Romeo takes the chance to ask Juliet if she's still coming with him, and she confirms it. That's when he seizes the moment to ask her out to dinner. It's something she never expected. But in the end, she agrees and they arrange to meet earlier. Romeo promises to text her later, and Juliet wishes him a good talk with the counselor. As soon as they part ways, the redhead's phone buzzes. It's a message from Abby, asking if she's free after class. Speaking of her, Abby soon shows up behind her, saying she'll only need about 2 hours. Juliet asks why she even texted if she'd been waiting there all along, and Abby explains she saw her with Romeo and didn't want to interrupt. The brunette even asks if the two are going to counseling together, which the redhead quickly denies. Abby wants her friend to come see the dress she's working on in person so she can give her opinion. That surprises Juliet, since Abby usually makes big reveals. But Abby doesn't care much about that right now, saying the kids in her class have very unique tastes. So she's considering something more traditional for the presentation. Their conversation is cut short by noise. A commotion is happening, and the girls grow curious to know what it is. It's just the boys asking girls to the dance. The girls end up watching the whole scene. In the end, it all works out for the guys. Abby finds it all distasteful, not understanding why they make such a big deal about it, while Juliet thinks it's fun to see everyone cheering like that. But the grumpy brunette can't understand why people need to make such a fuss. It's not like they're proposing marriage. She'd rather keep it simple. The redhead defends them, saying it's homecoming season, so they're allowed to have a little fun. Fun fact? The tradition is that the date first asks for the dance, and only afterward makes a more elaborate proposal. Annoyed, Abby says that if anyone ever asked her out that way, she'd throw herself into the Arkansas River. Juliet laughs because she knows her friend probably would have been asked if KJ hadn't already done so before homecoming, back when they were still together. Back to her own thoughts, the redhead drifts off, planning her week. She's going to the observatory on Thursday, so her schedule is packed with outings with Abby and Romeo. Because of that, she decides to get her homework done early. When she opens her locker, several notes scatter through the air. They're offensive, intimidating messages. Juliet manages to grab one. It says Romeo is too good for her. The only thing she can think is how stupid someone must be to do something like this right in front of a security camera. Apparently, whoever's behind it doesn't care about being caught. Juliet suspects it's the same person who followed her all day. She only wishes the messages were more threatening. At least, then she could report them to the police. But it's just the usual nonsense from some pick-me girl. At least she wonders if this has any connection to her flat tire. Maybe it's the same person. She questions whether that tire incident wasn't just bad luck. Did someone actually want her to crash her car? Juliet doesn't expect everyone to like her. But still, it's deeply disturbing to know that someone hates her enough to do cruel things that could have seriously hurt her, or even just send these nasty notes. It could even be multiple people behind it. But she knows worrying won't solve anything. So she decides to text Abby, adding a few emojis to make sure she doesn't seem too upset. At least she's sure she'll feel better after talking to her. Finally done with school, Juliet gets home, only to find her parents arguing. Jennifer yells at her husband that getting involved in that case won't change anything, because Glenfield is a conservative university and they'll never renew his contract after this. But Anthony doesn't care, saying it's not his only job option. The woman fires back, asking if he's thinking of some washed-up college like Folsom. In silence, Juliet listens, and her day just keeps getting worse. Jennifer demands to know if he plans to take Juliet to an even more backward town than Ravenwood, reminding him that they already had to give up all the good schools in Boston when they moved to Kansas. The man insists things are different now. He has proof and a real chance of winning the case. The woman says his colleagues think he's crazy for getting involved and throws in his face that they're buried in debt from Eddie's hospital bills. Then the man shouts that their son almost died because of that medication. Those corporate bastards knew it caused epilepsy and lied about it. Back then, there was no clinical proof, but now there is. Anthony argues that Eddie still suffers side effects and that there could be hundreds of other children going through the same thing, but Jennifer doesn't see it that way. It was 7 years ago, and the boy has recovered since then. The father insists he's the only one trying to make things right, but the mother snaps that maybe he should focus on fixing things in this family. One of them says, if that's how it's going to be, maybe we should go our separate ways. Juliet runs to her room, trying to escape the storm, only to be flooded by the words, divorce papers. It's a rainy day, and over the phone, the protagonist is talking to her best friend. The boy is worried she might have gotten soaked on the way home, but she assures him she made it back before the rain hit. Juliet mentions how lucky she was not to have gotten her books wet, joking that she'd have had to make room for them in the freezer, even though she doesn't really understand the logic behind that. Suddenly, Luke asks if she's okay and if they can talk, catching her off guard. After all, he knows the redhead tends to get chatty whenever something's bothering her. With the excuse that he needs to use her computer, Theobald asks if he can come over. Luke arrives at the Holiday's house, and a curious Juliet asks if he ran into her parents on the way to her room, but neither of them was around, which makes the boy wonder if something happened. Juliet then reveals that her parents were arguing. It's nothing new for them, and the girl gives more details, explaining it's about that lawsuit she'd told him about before. Luke goes over to the computer, and the redhead, intrigued, asks what he's planning to work on that day. He explains he's helping Anthony organize some big data files since the man's been overwhelmed lately, so lending a hand doesn't hurt. Juliet says he's doing more for her father than she ever did, but for Luke, that's the least he can do. Still, she feels incredibly guilty for not helping at all, and given how her relationship with her parents is, it's not like she could have done much. Even though she knows exactly why her parents never talk about their problems, Juliet still feels completely useless, realizing why they've always kept her out of things. It had never even crossed her mind to offer them a word of comfort. Her father never asked for her help. After all, he trusts Luke more than his own daughter, doesn't he? She wonders if things would have been different had she gone to West Milford too. Then Luke brings her back to reality, telling her that his parents also used to argue a lot when he was younger. It wasn't that often, but when it happened, it got really ugly. Something hard to believe, honestly. Luke says that whenever his mother got angry, she'd take him to Korea without even saying a word to his dad. And that's why his visits there used to be much more frequent than they are now. Juliet can hardly believe Mrs. Jane would go that far just to cool off. Changing the subject, the redhead asks if Anthony ever talked about the lawsuit. Luke says it only happened a few times when the man wasn't busy, but he figures Anthony was just trying to keep some sort of connection. The boy understands that her dad, knowing Luke's father has been gone a long time, always tries to engage somehow. Hearing that makes Juliet feel a bit pathetic. The next day, the redhead meets up with her friend, who's fuming, wanting to know who the idiot was that wrote those locker notes. Juliet seems calm about it, but her smile is clearly nervous. Frustrated, Abby says whoever did it has some nerve. She just wants a name so she can handle it herself. But Juliet truly has no idea who it was. All she did was take pictures. The fashionista is determined to find the culprit and make them pay, calling them a coward who's too scared to confront people face to face, and saying the RET is a disaster anyway. After all, that gossip account was responsible for spreading headlines about an alleged relationship between the redhead and Gray Holt trying to ruin her reputation. That's when Abby reminds her it was a bad idea to have anything to do with the quarterback, because the closer she gets, the more ridiculous rumors she'll get tangled in, so she urges her to drop the group project. But Juliet can't. It's schoolwork. Her friend asks what she plans to do. She wants to know if Juliet's going to go after the trash talker or just let the school handle it, and whether she'll tell her parents. But Juliet knows her parents are already dealing with their marriage falling apart, so she can't add more to their worries. So her wish is for the whole thing to quietly fade away. However, Abby suggests checking the security cameras. The fashionista knows just how to do it. She knows the school guard always takes a smoke break during lunch and plans to sneak a look the next day. Juliet wonders how her friend even knows that. She answers, "Try dating KJ McCarthy. You learn these things when you go out with a delinquent." Juliet already knew that, without ever dating him. The two of them get assigned to clean the weight room. The man in charge explains that Mr. Spears wants them to face the consequences of their actions, giving them another week of detention unless they show some remorse. And right then, to make things worse, KJ swears out loud. He keeps pestering the man with dumb questions, asking if they can go home early if they finish soon, which is denied, then asks if they're supposed to just stand around, making Juliet realize what a mess she's gotten herself into. Juliet walks into the room to start her punishment. The weight room is open to all students, but no one uses it except the athletes. Meanwhile, KJ promised to grab the cleaning supplies. She hasn't been in there since the school tour with Romeo. The redhead notices she's not alone. She finds Gray on one of the machines, completely focused on his workout. Startled, she asks what he's doing in there at that hour. The player notices her presence and asks what she's doing there. So she has to explain about the detention thing, that her punishment is cleaning the room. She also adds that she didn't know he even worked out. Gray is completely exhausted from exercising, so when he tries to explain, his words come out between breaths. But luckily, Juliet understands that he's saying all football players are required to train. Once he recovers, Juliet confirms that KJ is her detention partner, and the boy immediately warns her that the other guy will do anything to get out of cleaning. But the redhead already has a plan. Each of them will handle a different section so the work is divided fairly, avoiding one person doing more than the other. She asks if he's finished his workout. He doesn't say anything, just raises his hand and tells her not to come closer, which makes her wonder why. Gray is just worried because he worked out so hard that he smells terrible, something Juliet thought he wouldn't care about, but the player is desperate to take a shower. He gets up and says he'll be right back. Juliet takes the chance to check her phone to see what's going on with the homecoming dance, discovering that the competition for king is fierce this year. To be specific, the battle is between the school's heartthrobs, Gray and Romeo, and the comments online are even hotter. Suddenly, Gray appears behind her and asks, "The pictures don't do him justice, do they?" Startled, the distracted girl jumps and he keeps teasing, saying the guy's the most handsome of them all, if she asks him, that is. Juliet asks if he's really competing for homecoming king, but of course, he wouldn't have accepted the nomination otherwise. It's no surprise to the redhead, since he's been that way ever since they were kids. Gray has always been so confident and never afraid to be the center of attention, and she's pretty sure he loves it when that happens. That's why she's certain the player will be crowned king again this year. The player interrupts her thoughts by asking when she'll be done with detention. She says probably in about an hour, which makes Juliet wonder why he asked. Gray wanted to see if she could work on their project afterward, surprising her. He's always unexpectedly serious about schoolwork, and as mentioned before, he really broke the dumb jock stereotype. Still, there's not much to do until Belle finishes editing the video, so she suggests he take it easy while he can. Juliet notices that apparently frustrates the newly workaholic player. With nothing else to do, Gray agrees to head home. The redhead doesn't understand what's gotten into him lately. He's been having so much fun working on the project. Actually, Juliet suddenly realizes something and asks where KJ went. He said he'd gone to get the cleaning supplies. Gray immediately looks suspicious. He asks if the guy really said he was getting the stuff for her. KJ is rich and probably never cleaned anything in his life, and Gray points out he likely doesn't even know where the cleaning products are kept. His words slowly sink in for Juliet until she realizes what they mean. The redhead turns red with anger, declaring KJ's doom, but to calm her down, Gray says he'll call the guy. While the call rings, Juliet doesn't bother hiding her rage, but KJ doesn't answer at all, so the blonde gives up, realizing this won't end well. Juliet, still fuming, yells that the traitor ran away from detention and demands to know why he looks so worried. Gray hesitates to answer, but finally, he tries to smooth things over, saying that if KJ really ditched detention, he won't be allowed to play in the homecoming game, leaving Juliet outraged, asking if the blonde is seriously suggesting they just let it go. Gray denies that, saying he knows where the cleaning supplies are and that he'll go get them. The redhead dares to ask if he's going to do the cleaning himself. Gray says not exactly, that he just maintains the place since he spends so much time there. Juliet's only response is that he's lucky she let herself be convinced not to do it. Sensing there's more to it, Juliet asks why he's so protective of KJ. The quarterback hesitates once again, but he tries to dodge the subject, saying he never said anything like that. Still, Juliet doesn't back down. She asks if he has some weird superstition that he can't win without KJ, reminding him it's not like Gray will have him around when he plays in college. Gray answers that it's not about losing without him. It's just that there's simply no receiver as good as KJ on the team. It's actually annoying how great he is. After all, everyone knows how terrible the team's defense is. That's why he begs her to keep quiet about KJ skipping detention. At least for now. Gray says the teacher will find out anyway if the guy doesn't come back by the end of detention, so all he's asking is for her to wait until then. If it were me, I'd only agree if he cleaned up in his friend's place. In the end, with an irritated sigh, Juliet agrees. Gray comments that she should hear all the crazy superstitions the other guys on the team believe in. The redhead pauses her task to listen. Surprised, she says she didn't know there were that many, but he says that on the other hand, he believes every athlete has at least one superstition. Danny Gillard, for example, always recites Matthew chapter 7 before a game, even though he doesn't go to church. He asks if she remembers the time they almost destroyed John Phillips High. Since then, it's become a team tradition to recite that chapter before every match. Juliet heard that Kevin Todd was completely obsessed with superstitions too. Gray thinks he's terrible. On game day, the guy has to sit in the same bus seat, use the same bathroom stall, all while listening to Taylor Swift. The redhead, horrified, asks how they even tolerate all that, but that's not the worst. Apparently, Frank Ackerman wears women's underwear for good luck, so the players teased him for it, but anything that helps him play better counts. Juliet is completely shocked by that information, but Gray thought everyone already knew. After all, the cheerleaders don't call him Vicky for nothing. It's because he wears Victoria's Secret underwear. The redhead then wants to know about him. Does Gray have any superstition he believes in? But he says he's not that type. Juliet glares at him as if shooting lasers from her eyes, because clearly he's lying. In the end, he admits he does have one, but it's a secret. The redhead teases him, asking if he also wears women's underwear, which annoys him. Gray prepares to reveal the secret he's kept for so long. He says there's a girl who's always been following him around, and Juliet, slightly concerned, asks if she's been doing that since he joined the team. The player explains that the girl is always offering him sweets. He tried refusing at first, but she'd just leave them in his locker. She kept giving him so much that it started to get really annoying after a while. So one time he threw them all in the trash. Almost crying, he reveals that the team lost that week's game by 29-4. Juliet thinks about it for a moment, realizing that's why he always has candy around. He's afraid of bringing bad luck by refusing her offerings. The redhead suggests sharing what he gets with the rest of the team, but he's scared that would count as bad luck. He can only share them with someone he trusts. Hearing that brings back memories for Juliet. After all, Gray had offered her some when they were working on the project, and that moment is still vivid and fresh in her mind. But the moment is interrupted when the supervisor returns, asking what the girl is doing there alone and where McCarthy is. The two freeze, staring at the man. The moment of truth has come. Juliet is the one who answers, saying KJ must have stepped out for a second and she's not sure where he went. Gray lets out a sigh of relief. Annoyed, the man says it's come to his attention that students like McCarthy have been skipping detention based on unproven rumors that teachers aren't properly monitoring them. At least the girl is allowed to leave after finishing her task. When the man walks away, they go back to working in silence. Juliet shoots a look at the player. Curious and maybe a little concerned, she asks what he'll do if KJ can't play this week. There's nothing Gray can really do about it other than come up with a new strategy. After all, there's no point in dwelling on the past. Holt, being a good quarterback, prefers to focus on the next game plan. Juliet is confident he'll do just fine. As they walk side by side, the redhead asks if he plans to play for New England one day, like Tom Brady, but that's not part of his plans. As everyone knows, Tom Brady is an American football player who's won the most Super Bowl titles in NFL history, being one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Gray asks her not to take it the wrong way. He thinks the Patriots are amazing, but it wouldn't be much of a challenge to become the best by playing for them since they're basically in a league of their own. His goal is to make his team the best that exists, no matter where he ends up, and he's even going to break Tom Brady's record. Smiling, Gray asks if that sounds more satisfying. Juliet's smile is gentle as she agrees that he's capable of it. Changing the subject, the blonde asks if she has an outline of what they need to say during the presentation, because even though he's been working on it, he's not sure everything's in order, surprising the redhead that he's already done that. The workaholic says he had plenty of time and that it's just a draft anyway. Juliet tells him to wait while she grabs her part from her locker. However, the moment she opens the door, she immediately regrets it. Those awful notes are still there. She freezes in panic, realizing she'd forgotten all about them. She'd kept them in her locker as evidence. There's no way to hide it from Gray, who, clearly irritated, asks what all those notes are. Juliet tries to play it off, saying someone just played a prank on her, but the player doesn't buy it. He asks if she told anyone at school about what happened. The redhead says no, which makes the boy angry. He tells her she has to report it immediately so they can find the idiots responsible and punish them, and he even provokes her, asking if she's too much of a coward to say anything. Juliet makes it clear she's not afraid and that she can defend herself. Wanting honesty, Gray asks if she's acting that way because of what people have been saying on that gossip site, RET. The next day, Gray shows up looking completely different, arms crossed, serious expression, like he's ready to intimidate whoever's responsible. And of course, his eyes are fixed on Juliet, like he's her personal bodyguard. Naturally, this draws attention from the other girls, who want to know why he's acting that way, even asking if the two of them had a fight. Juliet has to admit she didn't handle things well the day before when she yelled at the player that she didn't care. She believes she caused all of this, but of course she denies it to her friends. Even Abby, the biggest hater of football players, wants to know what Gray's problem is. So Juliet explains that he saw the notes in her locker and demanded to know why she didn't do anything about it, which actually surprises Abby. She'll eventually have to admit that maybe her ex isn't the best example for every guy out there. Abby sets her lunch down on the table, irritated, saying it's none of his business. She walks straight over to the table where Gray and her idiot ex are sitting. She tells Gray to knock it off because she's tired of his constant staring. That doesn't seem to please the quarterback. KJ even tries to greet her, but she snaps at him to shut up. It doesn't take long for the situation to catch everyone's attention. Some people even start joking that Abby must have a crush on Juliet too. Speaking of Juliet, she tells Abby not to get involved in her life. Unbothered, Gray says he's just worried about her. That doesn't help the tension, or Abby's mood. With people saying it looks like they're fighting over Juliet's love, the redhead gets even more nervous, realizing everyone's completely misunderstanding what's going on. To make it worse, some students start recording, betting the video will get tons of views. Juliet then walks over to her friend. She asks her to just let it go. They don't need to deal with this right now. The redhead says she doesn't have time for this, reminding her that the security guard only leaves his post at lunchtime. That convinces the fashionista. Still, Abby throws out her famous line, "Don't say I didn't warn you." Then she leaves, leaving the football players dumbfounded. Abby keeps ranting, saying she thought only KJ was an idiot. She hates how those guys think they can do whatever they want just because they're on the football team, and how even the teachers treat them differently. She tells Juliet to stay away from Gray, especially now that he's acting all possessive. Juliet laughs awkwardly, asking what her friend's even talking about, because the quarterback wasn't acting like that. But Abby only gets more frustrated, asking if she's blind not to have noticed. Clearly, Gray was marking his territory so no other guy would dare approach her. The fashionista scolds her, saying not to encourage him if she's not interested, and questions why she's giving Gray so much leeway, something she's never seen her do with anyone else. Juliet tries to respond, but she's no match for Abby's fury, who's now annoyed that they're running late. And to the girls' surprise, the security guard is already in the room. Through the school hallways, the girls talk about how complicated their day has been. Juliet reminds her friend to show her the dress after class. She also reveals that after that, she'll be going out for dinner and asks for help choosing an outfit. Smiling, she says she still has a lot to do. Her schedule is packed. Juliet asks if it's really okay for her to come in. She's now in her friend's sewing room. Aside from everything you'd expect in an atelier, one of Abby's classmates is sleeping inside a bag, almost camouflaged, while another is busy working and couldn't care less about what's happening around her. The stylist explains that they're all preparing their senior portfolios, so things are hectic, but tells Juliet not to worry about it. Looking around, the redhead asks her friend if those clothes are her creations. Abby confirms and says she's free to try on anything she wants. In Abigail's collection, there's a skirt made from recycled parachute fabric that took a while to shape properly, a neon patterned jacket, and shiny pants. Juliet finds it all wonderful. The girl is truly talented with her designs. Abby offers to show her own dress first. It's a night-like gown, covered in glittering lace with a small front slit that highlights the legs without revealing too much. Juliet is absolutely impressed. Enchanted, the redhead asks when the beading on the hem was added, saying they look like pearls in the night sky. And it turns out that was right after their last conversation. The color is unique, with a blue shimmer. That's because Abby dyed the material herself after buying it. She did it in her own bathtub, which still turns the water blue whenever she leaves it running. But Juliet agrees the sacrifice was worth it. Her compliment makes Abby light up, and indeed, the dress is stunning. And, well, Juliet will have to love it even more because it was made especially for her. Juliet still doesn't understand why she has to wear it, since it's her friend's dress for the homecoming dance. Then Abby reveals that she only said she was making it. She never said she planned to wear it, because the dress was designed entirely with Juliet in mind. It was made to fit her size. Abby couldn't wear it even if she wanted to. She'd been working on it for over a month as part of her portfolio project. And if Juliet doesn't wear it, her friend will have to live with the guilt of not being able to get into college. Hearing that makes Juliet rethink her decision. Not to mention, she might never have another chance to wear something so intricately crafted, and custom-made for her, no less. Juliet says she can't believe Abby kept this secret all this time, and even Abby admits she's surprised herself, saying it was hard not to spill, maybe the most difficult thing she's ever done. Someone suddenly calls her name, already knowing she's Juliet. After all, Sydney's heard plenty about the girl. Hot-headed Abby immediately snaps, "Who said you could talk to Jules?" But Sydney's just curious why no one mentioned the protagonist was a redhead. Ignoring her, the blonde says she'd love to have Juliet model for her projects. Whining, Sydney says it's so hard to find a redhead in the countryside and that Abby's being totally unfair for not wanting to share. Sydney wants to watch when the dress is tried on, but Abby doesn't allow it. Even with pleading, the obsessive brunette refuses to budge. Jumping to the fitting scene, the dress trial begins. Juliet is almost out of breath because it's tight, but Abby tells her to hold it in since she needs to cinch the hip area a little. The stylist says to wait and see how beautiful she'll look, to the point the homecoming queen won't even know what hit her, and to make the losers who bullied her regret what they did. But the protagonist thinks she doesn't need to show off to them in this dress, and the fashion tyrant orders her to hold her breath tighter. Juliet and Romeo had exchanged messages about meeting at 6:30 p.m., and she's already there. Since the area is busy, she needs to be careful with the cars. Going back a bit, Abby had revealed that Buchanan already knows about the dress. She didn't exactly show him the dress, but she recommended a few suit brands that would match. So Abby's plan is to make them the best couple at the dance. And that doesn't surprise the redhead. She already knows how her friend is. The protagonist's thoughts are interrupted once again by someone calling her. Juliet turns around, surprised by who's standing there. It's Patrick standing there, smiling brightly. Curious, Juliet wants to know what brings him to Kansas City, and he explains it's for a course to earn college credits. The redhead doesn't mind telling him she has a date, and well, Being this Romeo, he'd probably be just as happy to tell anyone. Juliet finds it a bit strange how excited he is to know with whom, and she doesn't give details, saying it's just with a classmate. Realizing she's waiting for her date to pick her up there, Patrick offers to keep her company. He asks how things are with Luke, if the two are getting along, but there's not much she can say. The boy also mentions he heard Theobald got the highest PSAT score in the entire county. Patrick goes on, impressed, saying their friend isn't even teaching to earn college credit. He's already done everything worth doing. But that doesn't make Juliet feel any better. Even though Luke is the only thing they have in common, she doesn't want to hear these things about him from Patrick. It's intimidating. She starts realizing there might be sides to Theobald she never really knew. And of course, the nerd knows how close she and her neighbor are. It's no surprise that, once again, someone shows up calling for Juliet. This time, it's finally Romeo. He's arrived. Juliet greets him and introduces Patrick, explaining why he's there keeping her company. The nerd immediately picks up on the English accent. Juliet then introduces Romeo properly. The first thing Patrick asks is if that's some kind of nickname between them, but Juliet clarifies that it's his real name. Now, together in the car, the blonde gets curious about how Juliet and Patrick met since he's never seen him at school. So the redhead explains that Patrick is a friend of Luke's, a mutual acquaintance. Surprisingly, Romeo remembers her neighbor who studies at West Milford. The voice of the GPS catches Juliet's attention, and she comments that it's so strange hearing it with a British accent. Laughing, the blonde explains he hasn't had time to change it yet and asks if it really sounds that weird. But actually, she says it makes her feel like she's on a mission for the British royal family. And honestly, she'd love a version of Romeo and Juliet that feels like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Joining in on the jokes, the blonde plays along, saying people would probably think their names were code names. It doesn't take long before they arrive at the restaurant. The moment Juliet steps inside, she's completely dazzled by everything. She also thinks it's a bit too much for just a casual dinner. Suddenly, Romeo asks if she's wearing makeup. He notices her hair looks different too, and she asks what's changed. Laughing, the boy asks if it'd be bad if he got it wrong, but she says no. Then, with a serious look, Romeo says that all he knows is Juliet is standing out more tonight. Juliet listens. Amazed, he continues, "Although you already stood out when I first saw you," and she can't believe he says that with such a straight face. She, on the other hand, downplays herself. Juliet says people must have always liked him for how bright and beautiful his hair is. Romeo asks if the color stands out. Then he admits that as a kid, he didn't like it, so he dyed it brown until a few months ago. He explains that he was the only one in his family with such bright hair, and because his grandfather was so conservative, he thought it made him look weak. Romeo was a very obedient grandson. Juliet tries to understand how anyone could call weak someone who looks like a Disney prince, but what she actually says is that she'd like to see him with brown hair and even asks for a photo. He says he has one, and that he looked normal. She doesn't believe him. Juliet insists there's no way he's ever looked normal in his life. Curious, she asks why he went back to his natural color. Romeo says he got tired of constantly worrying about what other people wanted him to do, and stopped caring. Juliet listens, concerned. Meanwhile, he smiles, looking relieved as if he's finally broken free of his chains. Changing the subject, Juliet asks what he thought of the suit brands Abigail recommended, making him realize the secret is out. He admits he already liked them. Curious to know more, the redhead is told she's not allowed to find out any further details. Annoyed, she asks why the two of them keep making all these secret plans. Juliet explains that earlier, she'd only thought she was going to look at Abby's portfolio, when suddenly her friend showed her the homecoming dress she'd been working on for an entire month. She thought Abby was going to wear it herself, so she still can't believe the whole thing was made for her. And Romeo adds that if she didn't find out sooner, that just means the plan worked perfectly. Dinner ends, and the two walk down the street while chatting. They still have some time before leaving, and there are a few places near the observatory where they can stay for a while. Because of that, Romeo asks her to wait there while he goes to get the car. Suddenly, something catches Juliet's attention. When she turns around, she sees a tall blonde man in a suit, very handsome and looking quite similar to her friend. The difference is that this one has a serious expression, as if he's angry at the whole world. He stares at Juliet like he's about to collect the mortgage on her house. Then Romeo calls out, Dan. This is his older brother, the same one he once mentioned had followed him to Kansas. Juliet greets him, feeling a bit nervous, thinking he might be upset. Dan says her name, then, like an adult, extends his hand and says it's a pleasure to meet the person he's heard so much about. The older brother asks what they're doing there, and learns they were having dinner. Dan himself is there because the law firm his company signed with is located nearby. His phone rings and he apologizes, needing to take the call. The redhead asks how he knew about her, and Romeo explains that he told his brother about a girl named Juliet in his class, admitting that he got a little carried away that first day. The boy even apologizes in case that offended her. But he wasn't the only one. Juliet reveals that she too got a bit carried away and told her friend about him on her first day. This time, Romeo doesn't seem to remember, so the redhead explains who she's talking about, reminding him that since her friend's name is Theobald, Mr. Harrison said it comes from Tybalt. The blonde jokes that if that logic holds, his brother should be named Mercutio or Malvolio. Luckily, he isn't. Speaking of his brother, Juliet remembers what the man said earlier and asks if he's a lawyer. Romeo confirms, explaining that Dan is in Kansas because his firm is involved in a legal dispute. He believes Dan is only supervising the legal process, not directly participating. Finally, the man ends his call and asks the lovebirds about their meeting there. Romeo explains that they met up because of astronomy club activities and that they'll be going to the observatory later, something he had already mentioned. The lawyer asks what time they need to be there. It'll be at 9 p.m. So Dan suggests Romeo invite Juliet to the Mavenham mansion since they have time to spare until then. This takes both of them by surprise, and the older brother explains that the place is nearby and it won't take long to get to the observatory afterward. He says he was going to rest there after work anyway, and that they could have some tea after dinner since they're already in the area. To be sure he's heard correctly, Romeo asks if that means he's inviting Juliet for tea, and Dan confirms, clarifying that he just wants to learn more about his brother's school life. Now speaking directly to the redhead, the man apologizes for interrupting their date, then formally invites her. The Mavenham mansion belongs to the brother's grandfather, who, being fond of hunting, rebuilt it after purchasing land where the activity was permitted. Romeo doesn't go there often since it wasn't designed for living. Meanwhile, Juliet is in complete panic. She never imagined a place like this even existed in Kansas. After living there for 10 years, her eyes had never seen anything like it. Having never set foot in such a place before, Juliet asks if he's sure she can go inside. Romeo opens the door, and just from the entrance, the redhead is already completely amazed. As she climbs the stairs, her neck practically twists as she tries to take everything in. No luxury was spared in the mansion. She comments that a place this big must need someone to take care of it, and learns that the caretakers usually have time off around this season, which surprises her even more. Juliet walks past the hunting weapons, and they immediately catch her attention. She asks if they're real. Romeo says they probably are, but he can't be sure. He's never used one before. Juliet says his grandfather must have wanted him to learn how to shoot. After all, people don't usually leave weapons out in the open unless they're meant to be used, and it makes perfect sense. She even remarks that she's surprised the old man didn't make him learn just to make him tougher, considering how harsh he was about his hair color. The redhead shares her thought that maybe the patriarch actually trusted him, or maybe he wanted Romeo to learn someday. Smiling, the blonde agrees. Then Romeo reveals that his grandfather really did want him to learn how to shoot. He even suggested that he join the shooting club when he went to Eton. Smiling, the boy says that might be why the old man never liked him. Mr. Buchanan truly is an old-fashioned man, a man of another era who believes a young man should know how to handle a gun, or who believes that dark hair and a strong presence are what make a man look proper. With that confession, Romeo discovers that the girl actually has some experience with firearms. Juliet explains that she received shooting training as a child because her friend's father was a soldier, and sometimes he taught them both together. That probably happened during the times Mrs. Jane wasn't fighting with her husband and taking her son to Korea. Speaking of Luke, Romeo asks if that's who she's talking about, and Juliet says she hopes she hasn't been mentioning him too often. But that doesn't bother Buchanan at all. On the contrary, he's interested in knowing what kind of person Luke is and hopes to meet him someday. The redhead says she'll make sure of it when she gets the chance. A housemaid suddenly surprises the couple. Romeo then asks Juliet to wait for him a few seconds. It doesn't take long before Dan appears, asking about his brother. The man still has that serious expression that could either end a war or start one. Juliet explains that one of the caretakers came looking for him and that Romeo said he'd be right back. Dan tells her not to just stand around and invites her to come with him. The redhead wonders if he really had to put it that way. In the sitting room, Dan shows off his elegant porcelain set and says he's prepared a light black tea for her, assuming she's never tried it before. He even asks if she's had any before. And while his brother comes across as down to earth, this one subtly gives off rich people mocking the poor energy. Juliet admits she doesn't like tea very much, and the man adds that she must have at least had the chance to try it once. Without fear, she says she doesn't understand why anyone has to sit around waiting for hot water to cool down. That earns a sarcastic smile from the older man. Dan apologizes for laughing, but says what she said sounded like such an American thing to say. In a way, he agrees with her, that people there don't drink tea as often. But in England, he says, tea is the answer to everything. Suddenly, the man asks if she knows the real reason Romeo came here. Juliet explains what she knows, that he followed his older brother, but the lawyer points out she probably didn't ask more about it, implying there's more to the story. Then he says, or maybe you two aren't as serious as I thought. Juliet laughs and asks if they were something like that. Would he have ordered them to end it? She adds, It's not like they're living in 15th century Verona. Dan practically admits it when he says he would like to, but denies that's the case. The man says he knows his opinion doesn't change anything, and if it did, Shakespeare wouldn't have written a silly melodrama like Romeo and Juliet. Still, right now he just wants what's best for his brother. And this is starting to sound like the setup for a forbidden romance. Dan says his brother already went off course once. He was doing well at Eton, but now here he is. The lawyer adds, and who knows what kind of trouble with girls he might get into next. Juliet is curious about what he means by off course. While sipping his fine black tea, Dan replies that it's rather complicated. And honestly, I can't blame Juliet for wanting to know what's wrong with him. Finally, Romeo appears, asking if his brother called for him and what he's doing there already, revealing that Dan separated them on purpose because he wanted to talk to Juliet alone. The three then gather in the living room. Dan starts talking about the legal dispute, saying that if the hospital hadn't messed with the court, they wouldn't have had to come to Kansas in the first place. And this whole situation is starting to feel like a modern-day Shakespeare play. He complains that it's not even a region where medical lawsuits happen often. Romeo adds that his brother works for a pharmaceutical company. As one of the few lawyers specialized in medical law, the man is buried in work. Dan mutters, "Who would have thought we'd be stuck in the countryside for this long?" Clearly not thrilled about being there. Hearing that, Juliet realizes she's never imagined feeling so much hostility towards someone she just met. Luckily, it's almost time for the astronomy club meeting, so Romeo says they should get going. He tells his brother they won't bother him any longer, even though the lawyer actually seems a little disappointed. Dan offers to drive them, but the blonde insists he'll take her himself since they're on a date. Juliet can't help feeling a bit of admiration for Romeo, clearly noticing just how different the two brothers are. While driving, Romeo apologizes for his older brother's rudeness. The girl looks at him calmly. It's not something that bothers Juliet. She even believes she might have been rude herself. Romeo apologizes for making things awkward and says his brother can be childish at times, adding that he's probably nervous because the legal case isn't going well. The blonde apologizes on Dan's behalf, understanding that it must have been uncomfortable, and if Romeo had heard everything his brother said, he'd know it really was. Still, Juliet says it's fine, and that she actually enjoyed getting a look at the summer house thanks to him. Romeo says he doesn't know how much the man told her, but knows his brother is worried that, in the end, he might turn out like their father. That makes the girl remember their previous conversation. She understands the lawyer is trying to insert himself a bit into his life, but she wants to know what exactly Romeo means by that. Romeo recalls having told her that Dan is his half-brother. In short, it's because of his mother. What Romeo shares is meant to be kept secret, and the story he heard is somewhat surprising. Romeo's biological father married a working-class woman. Together, they had Daniel. The marriage, despite the class difference, fell apart for that same reason, followed by a series of disputes over property and inheritance. Dan's mother ended up with nothing and met an unhappy fate, and that already explains why he became such a dedicated lawyer. His motivation is noble, almost like a hero's journey. Romeo says that beyond his parents' situation, his older brother really does care about him, and that's why he acts the way he does. Finally, they arrive at the observatory for the astronomy club meeting. They're quickly greeted by the club president who, noticing they arrived together, immediately assumes they were on a date, which isn't entirely wrong. Under the starry sky, Juliet gazes at Romeo. The next morning, the redhead reflects on what happened. She thinks that if something like that had happened with her own parents, she'd have been too shaken to go to school. She didn't feel much sympathy for someone so emotionally scarred, no sense of empathy, because she had always assumed people with such tragic stories would naturally be kinder. And Dan is anything but that. So Juliet realizes she had a preconceived idea that people who are hurt wouldn't hurt others. But at least from what Romeo said, Dan adored him even though they're only half-brothers. That softens her prejudice a little. Earlier that morning, she and Luke had exchanged messages. He offered to drive her to school. As soon as she gets in the car, Theobald asks if she got home late the night before. Juliet explains that she had activities with the astronomy club, and, as she suspected, Patrick heard the car pulling into the driveway and already spilled the news about her date. The nerdy gossip texted Luke right after she left. Theo asks if she spent the whole day with Romeo. She doesn't mind telling him that they had dinner in Kansas City and went together to the Powell Observatory. Juliet then gets a notification reminding her of Luke's upcoming birthday. She'd almost forgotten about his gift. Even while distracted with her phone, she mentions she visited the Buchanan's house. That instantly catches Theobald's attention. Juliet explains they met his brother in Kansas City and that she was invited, believing the older one just wanted to see how Romeo was doing at school. Luke is even more shocked that she met a family member of his, but Juliet shrugs it off, saying she only went because she was invited. And well, Dan was intimidating enough that it didn't feel optional. Excited, Juliet asks if he knows the small grove near the golf course at Twin Oaks. She tells him about the summer house and that it even has a name. She finds it cool that they name their homes, since she's only ever called hers my house. That makes Luke tease her, asking if she's going to start naming things now, and whether she'd like to be Juliet of Green Fables. adding another T to her name. It's a little jab, since there was a time when she was obsessed with Anne of Green Gables. The character had an extra E, and Juliet followed suit with a T. While most kids laughed at her for it, Luke was the only one who wrote her name the way she wanted, and those memories make her realize how much things have changed. To me, the boy sometimes seems harsh toward her, or maybe it's just jealousy making him act that way. Smiling, Juliet asks if he wants to be her Diana. The boy asks if she really thinks he fits that role. Juliet reminds him that Diana said yes when a redheaded stranger she'd never met asked her to be her best friend forever, while Luke, on the other hand, hated her the second he saw her. He denies it, saying that's not true at all. She asks if he remembers calling her by her last name when they first met, how he addressed her father as Mr. Holiday and her simply as Holiday, but that doesn't mean he hated her. Luke says they were just kids back then, and Juliet reminds him that even at that age, he already had quite the temper. She clearly remembers the first time they met. It's one of the few memories she has from when she was young. She'd always had this idea that all redheaded girls fall for dark-haired boys their age. Then she saw Luke. Just like Anne, who instantly liked Diana the moment she saw her, Juliet became fascinated by Luke when they met, but obviously, only in the sense that she truly wanted to be his friend, and you can't really blame her. She was probably just another girl from out of town, and well, just like Anne and Diana, the two became best friends forever. And that's where we'll stop for now. At chapter 31 of Juliet, we're not in Kansas anymore. What did you guys think about everything that's happened so far? Do you think Juliet and Luke are meant to end up together? Or will Romeo completely change her heart? And what about Gray? Is he just a side character? Or could he be hiding deeper feelings too? Personally, I love how this story mixes light romance with all those emotional layers. Family drama, jealousy, friendship, and that nostalgic feeling of growing up and realizing how people change. Juliet's journey feels so real, from dealing with her parents' problems to rediscovering what Luke really means to her. But tell me what you think in the comments. Who's your favorite character so far? And which team are you on? Team Luke? Team Romeo? Or maybe Team Gray? If you enjoyed the recap and want me to continue, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because things are definitely getting more complicated from here. Kisses and see you next time.